June 17th, 19. And just wanted to call this meeting to order. Welcome everybody. We have some interesting things on the agenda today, but firstly, I'll explain why we're casual up here. We had a road tour and we got off it pretty late, so we came in our jeans and stuff. So we're going to make up for it. Next Monday, we're all going to wear tuxes, so it balances it off. Disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Okay, seeing none. First presentation that we have is from our accountant, Matthew from KPMG. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. And thank you for having us here today. As introduced, my name is Matthew Betik. I'm the lead auditor from KPMG. With me is Sam Sevchik, and between the two of us, we are responsible for the conduct of the financial statement audit. Our audit findings report, which is what I'll walk through right now for a few minutes, was included in your agenda materials. So I won't read it word for word, but I'll touch on some of the highlights and some of the required communications that we need to go through here today. I understand Mr. Bradey also has a presentation as well that will speak more directly to the financial statements themselves. Those as well were included in your agenda materials. I'm going to advance this along. Looks like I can't control it. That's good. So I just wanted to reiterate that the purpose of this report is to go through the audit findings for the year, and these are the financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2018. In terms of completing the audit, we're finished for all intents and purposes. We just need to go through this process, and once the statements are approved, we can issue our audit opinion thereon. In the agenda materials with the draft financial statements, you will see a copy of our draft audit report. That is a clean audit report. There's no qualifications or modifications in that opinion, so that is what you would expect to come from this process. I'm going to skip through other parts of the executive summary now, down to page 3 of the executive summary. And just at the bottom here, with respect to independence. As the auditors of the township, we are required to be independent, and we've maintained that independence throughout our term as auditors. On the next slide, we do need to discuss the concept of materiality. Materiality sets the foundation and the benchmark for which we conduct our audit tests and our work. It also provides us with the quantitative threshold by which we would allow any uncorrected errors in the financial statements, but still issue a clean audit opinion. I will say that over the course of our work, there's nothing that we identified that does remain uncorrected, so you don't have to worry about that so much. We've set materiality at approximately $820,000, which is 2% of approximately $41 million, which is your estimated total revenues when we started the audit. These are generally consistent with the prior year. So we move on to the next slide. We see a graph here that shows the annual surplus and how it's evolved over the past number of years. We can see continued fiscal responsibility with respect to maintaining an annual surplus and seeing it grow. We do note as well somewhere else in the program here that these surpluses are the ones that are calculated for the purposes of the audited financial statements, and there are adjustments between these and what would be included in your budget. We do see that total revenues have increased in the current year by approximately 16%. The main driver of that is an increase of about $2.1 million in government transfers, so that they're transfers from other levels of government, and that can be fairly lumpy from year to year depending on the nature of the activities that are going on. We do see that expenditures have increased over the prior year by 7%, and thus we have an increase in the surplus this year compared to the prior year. On this slide, I want to remind the committee in the consolidation section that the township's financial statements include the Fergus and Elora BIAs, as well as your investment in Centre Wellington Energy, which includes Centre Wellington Hydro, as well as your investment in Centre Wellington Communications, Inc. For every audit performed in Canada, the auditor has to consider the risk of fraud. And when we talk about the risk of fraud, we're specifically referring to the risk of intentional manipulation of the accounting records as they roll up to the financial statements. We're not talking about where the township may be a victim of fraud from outside sources. In terms of that, our main area of focus is on the risk of override of internal controls. And so what we mean by this is regardless of how good any internal control structure is, there still is an opportunity, incentive, or rationalization to override those controls to, again, manipulate the financial records. We've gone through all the tests that the audit standards require us to go through in order to mitigate this risk, and we have absolutely no findings whatsoever. One of the major sources of class of expenditures is obviously payroll. There are many people that work for the township. As a result, this is a significant area of focus for us. We've looked at the internal controls around the hiring and termination of employees and making sure hires are paid in accordance with their contract. We also set an expectation of what we expect salaries and wages to be for the year by looking at full-time equivalents, headcount changes, step increases in pay, and other changes in accruals. No issues were identified as a result of that work. Second item on this slide deals with taxation revenue. In this case, we take external sources, including the MPAC assessment data, multiply it by the approved tax rates in the budget, and recompute what the expected tax revenue should be. And that worked out perfectly. Another major area of focus is the accounting for tangible capital assets. Obviously, the tangible capital assets are the largest single item on the financial statements of the township. As a result, we statistically sample current year additions and agree them back to source documentation. Usually those are invoices from the third-party suppliers. We also look at various expense accounts that have a repair and maintenance nature to make sure that there weren't capital assets included in those accounts that should have been accounted for differently. We also look at the amortization expense, recompute what we think it should be based on the policies and the estimated useful lives of those assets, and noted all of those things checked out properly. We do want to bring to your attention that during the year we noted that there were additions to fixed assets by approximately $15.8 million in the year, and when we compare that to the annual amortization of $8.5 million, we do see that the assets are being replaced at or about the rate at which they're being used up, which from an asset management perspective is the way to go. When it comes to long-term debt, this is another significant statement on the, or caption on the financial statements. We do confirm the balance of the debts owing to those parties that are holding those debts to make sure the records agree. We recalculate the interest expense and make sure the presentation is appropriate. Last thing I'm going to talk about here in this section deals with employee future benefits, and these are the early retirement benefits that are allowed to certain employees before they reach the age of 65 and move on to the full-time owner's pension. These are generally extended health, dental, and life insurance benefits for that short period of time. The township uses an external actuary, Nexus Actuarial Consultants, to calculate those figures. We do rely on the work that they perform, but we also make sure that the assumptions and the data sets that they use in calculating those figures are appropriate. And again, we didn't have any findings that came from that. As I close up the presentation here, just want to reiterate that the form and content of the financial statements, these are appropriate for a municipality that prepares its financial statements under the public sector accounting standards. And then on the next pages for adjustments and differences, as I had said before, we did not have any items that remain uncorrected in these statements. So just as I close to the chair, I want to thank Dan, Mark, and the rest of their team for the assistance they provided to us during the audit. We got excellent cooperation, no issues or concerns there. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew. So do our staff get a trophy or award or anything?
Well, they work for you, so that's up to you to decide.
Okay, well, we'll maybe put a motion on the table for that. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Question Materiality,
Yes.
at 820,000, that feels like a big number to me on a $41 million budget. Can you explain that a little more to me and why you would choose such a large number for materiality?
Sure. So yeah, clearly that's a different level than how council and staff would manage the organization, so we're not sort of suggesting that. Audit standards require us to set materiality anywhere between 0.5% and 3%. So at 2, we're sort of somewhere in the middle, which is generally consistent with our audits of municipalities in the province. I'll give it to you in this context. I would say the 800,000, if your revenues were, say, higher or lower by 800,000 off the 41 million, would a third party looking at your financial statements come to a different conclusion as to the size and scope of your municipality? And we think they wouldn't. It would need millions of dollars in adjustment to look at the financial statements and say, oh, this is a much smaller municipality or a much larger municipality. Is that helpful? Okay.
Great, thank you, Matthew. And I think, Mark, you're going to come up and do staff report.
Okay, so there's a report that is attached to the financial statements that starts on page 28, I think, in the package. So I'll go over this quickly. There's a big agenda today, but I will quickly run you through the financial statements. I think as I go through the financial statements, we'll cover most of the stuff that's in my report. But basically, the report summarizes the purpose of each statement in the financial statements, and it highlights some of the major changes in the balances. Attachment 8 is the audited financial statements. Attachment B provides a reconciliation of the 2018 operating fund surplus that was presented to council probably a couple months ago now, I think it was, of approximately $400,000 to the $13.2 million surplus that's included in the consolidated statement of operations. So if we skip ahead to the financial statements, as Matt mentioned in his presentation, the audit report is that they're proposing is a clean audit report. That's on page 34 in your package. Skipping ahead to page 37 is the consolidated statement of financial position. Basically, that's the equivalent of the private sector's balance sheet. So it's split into kind of 3 major sections here. Financial assets, which is what the township owns. Financial liabilities, which is what the township owes. And non-financial assets, which are assets that essentially are held for the provision of future services. And the biggest component of that is the tangible capital assets. And they're approximately $227 million at December 31st, 2018, which is the year end. So total financial assets December 31st, about 73 million. Total financial liabilities were about 45 million. The non-financial assets were about 228 million. And that leaves us with an accumulated surplus of about 255 million. One thing to keep in mind with accumulated surplus, it is not funds available for spending, as 227 million of that value is for tangible capital assets. TCAs, or tangible capital assets, are not available to discharge existing liabilities, but they're held for the provision of future services. Next page, the statement of operations. You may also hear this called the income statement. One thing I'll point out, the budget numbers on the left-hand side, that excludes amortization for tangible capital assets, because you recall when we did the budget, we do a special report that basically excludes us from including amortization in the budget, because if we include in the budget, we'd have to levy taxes on it. We don't want to do that. So again, it's just broken into revenues and expenses. Total revenues are almost 48 million. Total expenses are about 34.5 million. So that gives us an annual surplus of about 13.3 million. Again, if you follow your way through, you'll get to the accumulated surplus. At the end there, it ties back into the statement of financial position. Again, I think Matt mentioned this well. Do not confuse the operating fund surplus of $400,000 for 2018 based on that report a couple months ago with a $13.2 million surplus that's in these audited financial statements. There's a lot of adjustments that go into getting into these statements. There is, however, that reconciliation provided as attachment B that will try to walk you through getting from the operating fund surplus to the financial statement surplus. Next page, the consolidated statement of changes in net financial assets. This statement provides additional information related to the non-financial assets of the township, so that's your prepaid expenses, your TCAs, and your inventory. And the inventory is mainly just sand and salt inventory at year end. It does, however, show the acquisition of tangible capital assets and usage of the capital assets through amortization expense. So you'll see the amortization expense there is about $8.5 million for the year. Next page is the consolidated statement of cash flows. This statement reports the uses and sources of cash for the year. So it's broken into four major areas. Operating activities is one of them. Then there's capital activities, which is basically tangible capital assets. Investing activities, which is our short-term investments, and financing activities, which is our debt. So the cash position at the end of the year is almost $28 million, and it increased about $3.8 million during the year. The rest of the statements, essentially are the notes to the consolidated statements, and that just provides details on the accounting policies that were used to derive the financial statements, and it provides additional disclosures on certain items that were in the body of the financial package as well. That was a pretty quick run through. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that.
Thank you, Mark. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Your Worship. Question, Mark? Two questions, actually. I noticed, can you tell us the total amount of debt owing by the township as of this moment?
As of this moment, I don't have...
Or pardon me, at year end, December 31st?
Yes. At December 31st, it's on page 37, the net long-term liabilities line there of $22,549,159.
Okay. Second question, Mark. I noticed a big increase in receivables up around to the 6.6 million mark. Big jump over last year. Can you comment on that for us?
Mark, can you just put your mic on?
Sorry. That's a good question. It does go back to, I think Matt might have actually touched a little bit on it, but I think he looked at it from the revenue side where he mentioned that grants are up. Well, within that receivable balance is about $2 million of grants that were receivable at year end, mainly from the CWWF program and the Connecting Link program.
Anything else from council? Okay, thank you very much. Do appreciate the financial expertise that our team brings to the table. Really great for us as members of council to know that we have that looked after and we're on a solid footing. Recommendation of the Council of the Township of Center Wynton approve the December 31st, 2018 audited draft consolidated financial statements as presented by KPMG LLP Chartered Professional Accountants. Move for that recommendation. Councillor Foster, second by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Confirmation of the agenda. I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wynton confirm the agenda for its meeting held June 17, 2019. Moved by Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? And that's carried. We have our agenda. We have a series of minutes there. So I have a recommendation that the minutes of the committee whole meetings held March 25th, April 8th, April 23rd, and May 21st, 2019 be adopted as circulated. And move for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor Van Leeuwen. Any questions about those minutes? Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to exclude the March 25th and the April 8th minutes because I think they're incomplete. There was a lot of discussion that's not in those minutes at those meetings. And I think that on the April one, there was a desire for us to know the costs of those, and that nothing is, and how they were, how the consultant was chosen and all that, and that's not conveyed in those minutes. And so I think that these are incomplete and they should be deferred till that information is added. For example, one of the discussions that we had when this orientation or this procedure was done was that we had something that said, bring no surprises. And there was a lot of discussion about that. And there is no indication that there was. There was understandings that perhaps we needed to change the way the agenda is presented. And there is no indication in these minutes that that discussion actually happened. And that's important for the public to know. What these were there were information meetings, but what we're doing right now is we are approving these minutes, and they don't indicate all of what happened there. So I'd like to defer those, because I think that anyone reading these would not see the complete picture of what happened. They're only the results of what the consultants we ended off with. So that's what I think, that minutes are not like that. Minutes have the whole session of what we're doing.
I think that our clerk could talk to that, but I do know my knowledge of minute taking is that minutes are supposed to be without note or comment. They're supposed to be talking about what the decision of council was, not the nature of our discussion. If you want to know the nature of the discussion, you have to actually go to the meeting. So that's not, you're not supposed to keep all that detail in minutes. That's not what they're for. As far as you wanting to pull them out, we can pull them out. We have a mover and seconder for the whole thing now, so I don't mind pulling those out and voting on them separately. Can we do that? Okay. So you want to pull out March 25th and April 8th? You want to pull them out separate or together?
They're really part of the same.
Okay, we'll pull those out separately. Okay, so recommendation should read then that the minutes of the committee of the whole meetings held April 23rd and May 21st be adopted as circulated. Move for those recommendations for the last two. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? So those are carried. And so then we have a recommendation that the minutes of the committee of the whole meetings March 25th and April 8th be adopted as circulated. Move for that recommendation. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, no delegations today. Consideration of reports. We have 7-1, a partial demolition of a listed property, 249 St. Andrew Street East, a detached garage, and we have our senior planner. Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. The report before you is regarding the partial demolition at the listed property known as 249 St. Andrew Street East in Fergus. The demolition is for a detached garage only that is in poor condition. The owners intend to replace the garage with a new garage in the same location and in a similar style. The proposal went to the Heritage Committee at its meeting of June 12th, and the committee had no objection to the demolition. So that is staff's recommendation that the demolition be permitted.
Thank you, Mariana. Questions from council? Okay, I'll read the recommendation. The Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve the partial demolition request for the detached garage only at the listed property municipally known as 249 St. Andrew Street East, Fergus, in the Township of Center Wellington, and that the property municipally known as 249 St. Andrew Street East, Fergus, remain on the Township's Municipal Heritage Register. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor McElwain, second by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that is carried. 7-2, partial demolition at 226 Union Street East in Fergus.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. Similarly, this is for a partial demolition request for the listed property at 226 Union Street East. It is for demolition of a barn. The barn is in poor condition again. It has rodents and it's had a structural assessment done. The owners wish to demolish the barn and rebuild it with a new detached garage in the same location. And the Heritage Committee had no objection as well. The property was not listed for the barn, but for the dwelling.
Thank you, Mariana. Questions from council? Okay, I'll read this recommendation. The Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve the partial demolition request for the barn at the listed property municipally known as 226 Union Street East, Fergus, in the Township of Center Wellington, and that the property municipally known as 226 Union Street East, Fergus, remain on the Township's Municipal Heritage Register. Mover for this recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And opposed? And that's carried. 7.3, notice to intent to designate 7535 6th line in Nichol. Mariana.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton. The property at 7535 6th line, formerly in the Township of Nichol, is the subject of a demolition request that was received on May 13th, 2019. I think we'll just bring up the map now. So that's the location just east of County Road 7 on the south side of 6th line, just south of Elora. As the property is listed on the municipal register as a non-designated property, the owner was required to provide the township 60 days notice to allow time for a heritage assessment. Demolition was initially requested in July of last year and considered by the Heritage Committee at the time after undertaking some research. But since the property was still occupied by the tenants and a site visit wasn't really viable at the time, the owner subsequently withdrew the application in September of last year. The current notice starts the 60-day process again, so it was received in May of this year. The property is now vacant, and the owners have indicated that the dwelling is in poor condition and would like to demolish it rather than invest in its repair and restoration. They have also obtained a building permit to construct their new dwelling adjacent on the property adjacent to this one, so just to the east. That also came with a lot line adjustment that was recently approved for a new driveway location. So once a demolition notice is received, staff commissions research from the local archives and collects any additional information and places it on the next Heritage Committee agenda. Staff and several members of the Heritage Committee, at the invitation of the owner, attended the site on May 23rd to conduct the site visit and heritage assessment and considered the matter at its meeting on June 12th, so last week. At that meeting, a statement of value was presented by all of the information that was obtained to date and outlined how the property might meet the criteria that's outlined in Ontario Regulation 9 of 06. So in summary, those are design physical value, historical associated value, and contextual value. Those are the three values that are provided under the Heritage Act. The property is thought to meet all three of those values. The property is considered unique as an intact farmstead, almost in its original state from when it was constructed around the turn of the century, in an architecturally significant farmhouse style built in what we would call the Queen Anne style with a two-story bay and large decorative brackets and overhanging eaves. So it has a lot of external decorative elements in the Italianate style. And this style showcases basically the prosperity of the family at the time, which is not typical of an Italian farmstead, which was a farmstead that was built normally in a vernacular style, the Ontario style. The property is associated with 5 generations of the Sullivan family, Irish immigrants for whom the structures were built, many of whom were active in public service, and prominent local community members active on various boards and associations. There is a large wooden bank barn and lengthy spruce line driveway, which contributes also to the contextual landscape value. The committee, after carefully reviewing all of the information, recommends designation of the property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act to protect it from imminent demolition. Designation does not mean that the structures are frozen in time, but only that any future alterations require council approval through a heritage permit process, and demolition would not be permitted. Designation is the only means by which a property can be protected from demolition in the short term. A detailed statement of value is provided in the staff report, and as I said, the property is considered to meet all 3 criteria. Provincial regulation requires that it meet only one of the 3 criterion to be considered worthy of designation. Although it is preferred, owner consent is not required for designation, and that's for the benefit of some of the newer members of council who may not have gone through this process previously. Both the legislation and the case law suggests that designation is not, owner consent is not required for designation. The provincial policy statement states that significant heritage resources shall be conserved, so it is up to the community through its council to determine what is considered significant. To date, staff has also received 7 written submissions and 1 oral submission in support of designation and in opposition to demolition. One of the submissions is from one of the descendants of the property who will speak as a delegation today as well, and some of the other submissions are I think, in front of you as well today. While the mandate of staff and the Heritage Committee is entirely dependent upon determination of cultural heritage value based on the criteria under the Act, Council may consider additional information that is presented. And it is recognized that not all heritage properties can or should be protected, but those that have unique value and characteristics and help tell the story of the settlement and development of the township are those that should be considered good candidates for protection. The owner of the property attended the heritage meeting last week when the matter was discussed and where the recommendation to designate was made, and was provided the opportunity to provide any additional information to council, which I'm sure they will be providing today. After reviewing all of the information, staff recommends that council proceed with a notice of intention to designate the property and would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mariana. And I wanted to thank members of the Heritage Center Wellington Committee as well. They've done their job and they provided their recommendation to us, and now it's in council's hands. But I do want to, whatever way council goes, I did want to thank members of the Heritage Committee for doing their job. Appreciate that. So we have 2, I'm going to leave questions till after our delegations are done. So we have 2 delegations registered here, and the first we have is Irene Sullivan. Welcome, Irene. Just hit your button on your thing, so thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on this important topic. My name is Irene Sullivan, and I'm here in a voluntary capacity to speak on behalf of the Sullivan family that lived in this farmhouse at 75356 Line in the former Nichol Township for 5 generations. I'm here to support your Heritage Committee's and staff recommendation to designate this farmhouse under the Heritage Act. Before beginning my presentation, I would like to start by recognizing your role as elected representatives. Your leadership and civic engagement are greatly appreciated by the citizens of Centre Wellington. With me today are my family and friends, and I want to acknowledge my mother, Margaret Sullivan, the matriarch of our family, who's here, and she's 95 years young. There's many that wanted to be here today, and some have written, but we all want you to know that we believe that this is something that is worth keeping. In fact, our local historian and librarian at the Ennetville Library just told me a couple of hours ago that the library Facebook post about this issue has reached 2,689 and has been shared 29 times in a matter of days. So there's definitely community interest. Now, oh, there. So just to orient everyone, I don't know if this was part of your tour today, but the property we are discussing is located just 6 kilometers south of Elora on the 6th Line, Ward 2 of Centre Wellington Township. It's located between the Elora Road and Highway 6 and the communities of Ponsonby and Ennetville. As you can see, the farmstead is a significant rural landmark in this part of Centre Wellington. The report and recommendation that you have received from the Heritage Committee provides you with all the necessary information required to protect this historical asset from demolition. I would therefore like to focus my comments on the value of this house as a historical rural landmark to our family and the community. But first, let me introduce myself. I recently retired as the Director of Community Economic Development with the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario. I also worked for 25 years with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. I only tell you this because throughout my public service, I dedicated most of my career to supporting community economic development in rural communities across Ontario. In this role, I taught and learned firsthand the importance of balancing the economic, environmental, social, cultural needs of a community to ensure a healthy, sustainable, and prosperous community. Our family's Canadian history began 170 years ago when my great-great-grandmother, Margaret O'Sullivan, traveled to Canada by boat with 7 children after the potato famine in Ireland and the death of her husband. It was her youngest son, Timothy O'Sullivan, that moved to this property 140 years ago, where he lived with his wife, Alice Moran, 7 children, in a log house for 18 years prior to building the yellow brick farmhouse. I was inspired to read the quote the archivist found about my great-grandfather, that Timothy O'Sullivan was one of the best-known, most highly esteemed residents of the township, who always took a leading part in any movement that tended toward the good of the neighborhood in which he lived. This quote reaffirms for me the need for us to be here today and to continue the tradition of trying to do good for the neighborhood. You will note in the information provided to you that this 10-room, 3-story yellow brick house was built in 1897, 122 years ago. We understand the builder of the house also built the original Ponsonby School and a similar house, 1 concession south of the farm, for the Pinckney family. My great aunt used to tell stories about the large housewarming party that was held when the house was being built. The barn was built about 6 years later, and approximately 400 neighbors came to the barn raising. I love these stories as they capture the joy, fun, and celebration that the building of the farmhouse brought to the community. Each generation of Sullivans has maintained and improved the farmstead. My grandfather, John O'Sullivan, planted the spruce trees on either side of the lane surrounding the house. These trees still provide a historical landmark in the community and are visible from the Elora Road. My father, John Sullivan, and my mother, Margaret Sullivan, took over the farm when they were married in 1952. I'm the youngest of the 6 children, and the most notable family memory of my arrival was that an indoor bathroom was finally installed in the house. My mother spent years refinishing the work in the house, no small feat, as the kitchen alone had 2 windows, 6 doorways, and waist-high wainscoting all around. She did the floors and main stair banisters too. I wanted to provide you with this background so you understand that the farmhouse we are discussing today is not just an old house. It was our home. It has given us our roots in the agricultural and rural community. It is where we all learned to care for the land, our animals, our buildings, our family, and our community. The farmhouse was the center of our family life and where my parents instilled in us the importance of family and community. My father was a proud member of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, the Ontario Pork Producers Association, the Land Stewardship Committee. My mother was also a proud member of the Ennetville Women's Institute and 4-H club leader. Both my father and brother served on the Ennetville Library Board. In 1986, my brother took over the farm and raised 3 children, the 5th generation of the Sullivans on the farm. My brother planted trees at the back of the farm under the Land Stewardship Program. Unfortunately, in 2005, my brother was forced to sell the farm as part of a divorce settlement. This was a very hard time for our family as the sale of the farm coincided with my father's cancer diagnosis. He died in 2002. We were comforted to learn that the farmhouse was being rented to another large family who also loved the farmhouse. Tim even helped them put horse stalls in the barn. However, last August, we learned that this family was being evicted and that the owner had applied for a demolition permit to tear down the farmhouse. That was when I met with the chair of the previous Heritage Committee. Then we learned that the demolition request had been withdrawn, and since last fall, we thought that the house would escape the wrecking ball, only to learn on June 6th that the owner was once again requesting a demolition permit. But we are resilient, as our great-grandmother taught us, and that is why we are here today. Also, with my community economic development training, I've learned that the potential loss of a community asset can always be turned into an opportunity. It seems the current owner does not see value in the farmhouse. In fact, the house is surplus to the owner's needs. I understand that the Provincial Planning Act in Section 10.3 of Wellington County's official plan permits farm owners to sever a surplus farm dwelling. This is a new policy that was not available to our family when the farm was sold. If this policy had been in place, we would have been able to keep the farmhouse in the Sullivan family. This updated planning policy was created to deal with just this type of situation. Rural municipalities across Ontario use this planning tool to ensure that historical farmsteads, rural communities, and the rural landscape is protected while allowing large farms to consolidate and get larger. This policy is based on good planning practices that are guided by community economic development principles of balancing economic, environmental, and social needs for the betterment of the community. Because of this policy, demolition of an historical farmhouse is unnecessary and wasteful. These planning policies allow farm property owners to financially benefit from the sale of a surplus asset, or by even giving it to a charitable organization like 4-H Ontario. The environment is protected from the disposal of valuable building materials. The community and municipality can benefit from another taxpayer that wants to restore a historical community asset to its previous beauty and hopefully add another family to the community. This is a potential opportunity that can only be realized for this historical asset if you act today to support your Heritage Committee's recommendation to designate this farmhouse under the Heritage Act. A decision today could protect this property from any further irreparable damage, as the farmhouse has already been vacant for almost 6 months. This is your chance to ensure a piece of Centre Wellington's rural history is preserved and protected for the long term. We sincerely hope that you will seize this opportunity to honor previous generations by designating and protecting this historical asset and providing hope to future generations that want to live in a beautiful farmhouse and contribute to the community just like the Sullivans did for 140 years. Again, my sincere thank you for allowing me to speak to you today on behalf of the Sullivan family. Any errors or omissions in my presentation are my responsibility, and I would welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. And I'll call on our next delegation, Erik Davis, who is going to be speaking on behalf of the property owners. Welcome, Erik.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of the committee. Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to first double check. Did everyone get a copy of our correspondence that we circulated earlier today? If not, I have additional copies, but I just wanted to make sure everyone got it. So first off, let me introduce myself. My name is Erik Davis. I am a municipal and planning law lawyer with Miller Thomson. So what my particular focus is really anything to deal with municipalities. I have a particular interest and knowledge in relation to heritage designation. I actually used to sit on the City of Waterloo Municipal Heritage Committee, so I can understand and appreciate the role that the Heritage Committee plays in this process. And I do sincerely appreciate their efforts. However, I'm here today to basically request that Council not designate this property, and let me explain to you why. So, our first submission is that really there is nothing particularly unique about this property. In fact, what my clients did is they went through to look at a variety of other houses, and just nearby, so there's this house at 896 Wellington Road 7 in Elora, which is also a yellow brick farmhouse, and I can hand out these pictures just to make sure everyone has a copy. And as well, there's another property at 6702 Wellington Road 7, similarly in Elora. And then there's also one, perhaps less descript, but still a yellow brick house in downtown Elora at 48 David Street. The reason I raise these, and I can pass these out just so that everyone can have copies of them. The reason I raise this is that there are a number of other examples of houses similar in style to the one we're discussing today, but that are in a much better state of repair, and I would argue have heritage attributes that have been much better preserved than the house that what we're talking about today. 7356 line, if you look at the photographs appended to our letter, is best described as dilapidated. Both externally and internally, there are significant issues with the home. And ultimately, what we're looking to do is, if council, one of council's thoughts may be, well, we want to preserve, we want to make sure we're not perhaps losing something, and we want to make sure that we preserve perhaps examples of yellow brick farmhouses. We raise these pictures to basically show that there are other examples nearby in a much better state of repair, and we would essentially suggest, look, by allowing this particular building to be demolished, you're not essentially eliminating a particular architectural style. There are in fact a lot of yellow brick farmhouses in the county. We just brought a few minor examples nearby that are merely meant to be illustrative. In the current house, all of the original windows have been replaced with modern ones, as the original windows had rotted out. The roof was fixed to address some ongoing water damage. The chimney was replaced, or one of the chimneys was replaced. None of the work that has been done to date has been to a heritage standard, which, just to explain to everyone, a property can be on the heritage register, and the only protection that a property has while being on the heritage register is if someone applies for a demolition permit. That provides council with 60 days to make a decision on what to do with it. Other than that, the property owner can essentially do what they want with the property in question if it's on the heritage register. Now, once a property is designated, that's not the situation. As Ms. Iglesias outlined, once the property is designated, certain heritage attributes are listed, and you can't make alterations to the property, especially to the heritage attributes, without going back to council and seeking permission to do so. But what we want to do in this particular instance is highlight how this property, the state that it's in right now, is not the best example one can find. There is nothing unique about this property, and in fact, a number of the attributes that one might associate with it, for example, original windows or things of that nature, have already been removed. There's clearly been additions to the building. I think one of the fireplaces is in red brick. I believe it was added in the 70s sometime. And just the state of dilapidation that it is in is not the best example. If one were to look to preserve a yellow brick farmhouse building, this would not be the example to preserve. As I've outlined for you, just nearby, there are far better examples, clearly where a lot of money has been spent in preserving them with steel roofs and other things of that nature. This is not one of the ones we would submit that is best to be preserved. When we look at the historical associative value with the property, there were a number of things inserted in the staff report, and one of the challenges, and I think this is true for all staff reports of this nature, is that the problem is that we take it that there was a number of statements made in the staff report, and really what we're struggling with is that a lot of the background documentation, it was not appended to the staff report. Again, this is no criticism of the staff report, but just oftentimes we're left sort of debating statements. Ms. Sullivan came up and said a lot of things. I have no evidence of a lot of the things that she stated on this, or the historical associative value of this particular property. Really, what we try to outline in our letter is basically several concerns that we had, that there's a lot of information we would suggest that is missing or not there, to at least support its heritage designation, or at least its historical associative value. Similarly, when we're going into the contextual value, when we look at the contextual value of this property, if even in the photos that we saw earlier on, this house is very much hidden away. It is, behind a line of trees. We would argue that it is not linked with its surroundings. One does not have views from the house itself because it is surrounded by trees. In this particular case, there was a suggestion that this would be a landmark of some sort. We would respectfully disagree because it is barely visible from 6th Line, unlike some other historical or heritage properties where they're readily visible from the thoroughfare, when they're visible from miles around. That would again not be the case with this particular heritage property. One of the other issues that we wanted to highlight is just that, you know, we understand the importance, and we do not want to diminish the feelings of the Sullivan family in relation to the property, but respectfully, my clients purchased this property approximately 14 years ago and rented it out to tenants, recently took back possession of the property, and are faced with a very challenging problem in front of them. I think you can see what we've attached to our letter were comments about the state of the building. And I think it's important to highlight that we have a report from John Vanderweerd, who was involved in the Christian school building committee. This is involving the property in Fergus, if any of you are familiar with it, that was that dealt with a lot of different heritage elements. And one of the things, and if you look at his sort of final statement in his report, he says, while I can appreciate that this was a beautiful home when it was added to the registry, due to its age and tenant abuse, the home has deteriorated into a sorry state. There are now far better examples of this type of home in the township, and this home is not unique. Unless it was owned by someone of cultural significance, it is not worth saving. In my professional opinion, it is unreasonable to expect the present owners of the property to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring this home back to its former glory. And in his staff report, he outlines, again, a number of issues both internally and externally, and you can see immediately following our letter some pictures of the front entrance and the state of repair we find ourselves in. And then we also took a picture of one of the corners, again, just to show the status of some of the brickwork and the deterioration that we're dealing with here. Practically speaking, what we're looking at here is sort of evidenced by the 3 quotations that our clients got in relation to this building. So, as noted in the staff report, there's an issue in relation to asbestos and also with mold remediation. And we retained a quote from EcoPower Environmental, because essentially in order for the building to be safe to work on, in order to be safe to actually conduct internal renovations, we need to get rid of the asbestos, because obviously when asbestos is interacted with, it can go into the air and then become harmful. And we also need to deal with mold, again, to address any particular health issues. And the total cost to do that initial work was over $97,000, as indicated in the quote. And then one of the issues raised by John Vanderweerd and the electrical contractor is the state of the electrical in the premises. He said in the estimate, the home was found to be in a complete disrepair as far as electrical installation. It would be recommended to be completely gut the residence and have a complete rewire completed to make all of the noted hazards non-existent. And one of the hazards he noticed, well, and this was noted in John Vanderweerd's report at number 4, an interior wall has been removed upstairs, which appears to have been done without a building permit by the latest tenants, and electrical wiring is dangling and exposed. This is an unsafe condition. To essentially rewire the entire house, we're again looking at a cost of over $56,000. And then we obtained another quote from James Keating Construction Limited to essentially look at the entire building minus the electrical component, because we got a specialized quote on that. And they're looking at the total cost of just doing all of the other work of over $355,000, which would bring the total required expense to basically bring this building into a reasonable state, I would suggest to you, at close to $500,000. And that's assuming that the estimates are in fact accurate and no additional work is required. As we all know, estimates are never wrong. They're always on budget. But, you know, one of the things that we have to note, though, is heritage, in my view, is always a balance. I am very much a proponent of heritage, of preserving heritage buildings where warranted. In my respectful view, in looking at this particular building, this is not a unique building. This is not, at least at this point, a good example of the style that one would try to protect. There are better examples nearby that would be better examples to preserve that have been maintained in a state of good repair. There's, in our respectful view, insufficient evidence to actually justify the designation of this building in the staff report. There are a number of statements made, but we would suggest to you that we do not have the evidence to actually determine or bolster those particular statements. And so, at least not as yet. And so what we want to do, what we're respectfully asking council to do, is to not designate this property, because one of the things that council can consider is the cost prohibitive nature of actually bringing this building into back to life, or to bring it back to what it once was, and how onerous that would be on property owners. And I would dare say council itself has had to consider that in the past when looking at heritage structures of its own that are perhaps municipally owned, dealing with pedestrian bridges or other things of that nature. When you're looking at heritage, one of the things that you need to balance is you need to balance cost as well. That though it may be nice to preserve certain things in the abstract, when the rubber hits the road and you're actually looking at how much will this actual cost, and is the cost commensurate with what you're trying to protect? And in my respectful view and my respectful submission, this is not a situation on balance where, in my view, council should designate this particular property. Again, there are other properties, other things that council can do, and I respectfully and I respect the work that the Heritage Committee did in relation to this and other matters. And I understand that their role is to not consider the cost-benefit analysis. Their role is to not consider how much it would cost to my clients, how onerous it would be. They're there to look at the regulation under the Ontario Heritage Act and whether or not it applies to this particular property. But I think the committee here and council can take a broader view and look at things in a contextual basis and say, look, is this one of the buildings that we're going to say, you know what, we're going to look at the property owner, we're going to say, we need you to spend over $500,000 to preserve this because this building is essentially important to the township. In my respectful view, this is not one of those cases. One of these cases may come one day, and I thoroughly agree with Ms. Iglesias that you do not need the consent of the property owner to choose to designate a building. But in my view, the willingness of the property owner to designate should at least be taken into consideration, as well as what you're asking that property owner to do and to undertake. And I appreciate Ms. Sullivan's comments in relation to the history of the property. I would respectfully suggest that prior to selling the property, they had the option themselves to designate this building. They had the option themselves to come to Township Council and say, you know what we want to do? We feel this property is so important, we want to make an application ourselves and we want you to designate this building, but that did not happen. And essentially my clients 14 years ago purchased this property. I would suggest to you not completely understanding what being on the Heritage Register meant. You know, perhaps with an intention one day of occupying this property, but looking at the state of dilapidation and the incredible amount of work before them, and said to themselves, look, we just can't do this. Like, this is, the state that the property is in is just too much. And I appreciate the Heritage Committee feels it is worthy of designation. In my mind, I would respectfully request that council not designate the property, that there are other properties on which to focus its efforts on, and that the requirement to have my clients essentially expend such a large quantum of money on this particular property, given its present state, I would suggest to you would be exceptionally onerous. And I please ask council to consider that and to consider the totality of the situation that my clients find themselves in. So subject to any questions you may have, those would be my submissions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Erik. And Erik makes an important point that I think is important to say again to council, is that the Heritage Committee has done their job. They've been asked about the heritage attributes of this property, and they have done their job and provided recommendations through staff to us today. And council's mandate is a little broader, so we have to look at this in its entirety as a project and something moving forward. So with that, I will turn things, this is a difficult one for sure. I will turn things over to council. Discussion. Who wants to start? Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Yeah, where to start with this? I guess my concern is I don't like to see somebody saddled with a bill of $509,000 in order to designate a building that is for the municipality. I think as a municipality, if this is something that we want to survive for generations to come, then I think as a municipality, we have to be prepared to put money up front and help with this. Or else look at some other alternative, like is there a possibility of getting a rural, a surplus farm dwelling severance that would allow somebody else to come in and purchase it who wants to restore it, or for the Sullivan family to purchase it back. I mean, but to saddle someone with this cost, I have a challenge with that. When I think about, for example, 33 Henderson over here that has been struggling for some time to meet our standards for heritage restoration, and they're already hundreds of thousands of dollars and they haven't even broken ground yet. So I think this issue of who's paying the cost to maintain a heritage building is something that we really have to look at closely.
Councilor McLean?
Thanks, Kelly. I tend to agree with Ian on the $500,000 startup cost is really steep. To ask somebody to do that in a house that they're not going to use, but if you go on, a step further than that, if the house is demolished, you're not paying taxes on it. If it's refurbished, it all of a sudden becomes a tax burden to the family as well, long term. So it's not just the $500,000 upfront cost. There's long-term tax implications. If it's designated, it becomes much more difficult to sell, because then the next person coming along is going to have to do the rehabilitation. So it becomes a burden that way as well. So as much as I support heritage in every way, this is such a gray area, and not even gray area. It's just a very difficult decision, I find, that trying to balance these two things. Every time one of these come to the council, it's the same problem. We've not designated some, we have designated some. Some things that should be heritage have never come to council. There's always two sides to every coin, and I just think that the cost in this particular case is too high.
Councilor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I agree with the comments that have been made already. $509,000, almost $510,000 to add to a family that's trying to farm in our community. Trying to make a living farming is difficult enough. My question would be to Erik. Have you talked with your clients about any kind of severance of this particular lot, or is the portion of the lot probably the barn needed for the farming operation?
Thank you. To be clear, there's no intention to demolish the barn. I think there's a plan to use that. I mean, I guess my question is, and we can discuss this with Ms. Iglesias, is that I'm not sure this would be a situation necessarily for a surplus farm severance because of the way the lots are outlined and where they are. I'm just a bit concerned over if that would even be achievable. I don't necessarily want to go down that road because that's not the focus of the discussion here today. But I think there is an intention to use the barn and the remainder of the property. It's just that the building is just in a dilapidated state. And so I think my clients were left with, well, what do we do? And in their view, the responsible thing to do is to not just maintain or demolish by neglect or anything like that, but is to actually say, look, let's come to the township, let's come to council, let's be forthright and say, look, in our respectful view, the demolition in our view is the right path here, because we have an intention to partially restore the barn and continue to use the remainder of the property.
Thanks, Eric. I do want to follow up with it. Maybe Mariana can answer this question. I do want to pursue the line of thought that I think Councilor McCrae was getting at. If there is an opportunity to sever this property off so that somebody who does want a heritage home has the opportunity to kind of restore it. Is that a question that's appropriate? Can you answer that question? I don't know.
Yes, through you. Well, we'd have to explore it, obviously, but there is likely potential. Usually the farm dwelling surplus severances take the driveway leading up to the road, and then the house that was formerly part of the farm, and its septic system and anything like that that's related to the house itself and the well. And then, they try to minimize the amount of land that goes with the severance, so it's really just the house and driveway. So it is something that could be explored. The barn could be on, it is set far enough back that it could be on a separate parcel.
But as far as the property owner goes, is that like they want kind of a standalone property that includes the driveway with the trees and the barn? So that's probably why they're going this direction, because it's kind of a standalone homestead. Can somebody answer that one? Because I don't want us to go down another path if this is the ask today, and this is what the family is really looking for.
So I can tell you that my client's intention, as again just reiterated to myself because they're here in the gallery today, is that the intention is to make this all one farm. They do not want to lose the road access. They don't want to lose the barn. They don't want to lose the landscaping. They don't want to start going down that particular road. And as well, I would suggest to you, I mean, even if so putting that to one side, even if one were to explore it, I mean, I can only imagine the burden financially of severing off this parcel and trying to sell a designated building in such a dilapidated state. I mean, it would probably lose them the amount of money that you're saying that it would cost to repair it up, to restore the building. So that would be part of the challenging nature of this matter.
Councillor Lewin?
Thank you. It's my understanding that they're going to be building another home on this property, which would, and one of the big things that if we got to keep in mind, the surplus farm dwelling, if we do a severance from a surplus farm dwelling, then the existing land or the farmland with the bank barn would then get a zoning which would restrict the future of a building of a new house. Because otherwise I would say that would be a fairly easy option, but because we do rezone that existing land, that pushes that out. I find that a little bit of a struggle, because that would be a good option. There is something I think that I'd like to comment on is this being at the Heritage Committee. The Heritage Committee did speak quite a bit about the house and listen to the same submissions. And yes, the Heritage Committee has to look at this from the eyes of those three aspects. Very, very, how do they fit together? For myself, sitting on council, it's an advisory committee, so I try not to influence the advisory committee too much, which is important, I think. But this is probably one of the most difficult ones, where I look at the house and I see a beautiful design, but yet I visited the site actually today. I drove by, and if we're here to protect, I think this is the biggest struggle. If we're here to protect the landscape and something for the people to look at and to remember, I would have drove right by it. And I think that's the most difficult piece. Is it's absolutely a gorgeous structure, but when you drive in, you can't see it. You don't know it's there. How does it fit? I would have never known. And I think those are some of the pieces where what do we see as contextual value? The roof's not original, the chimneys aren't original, the windows aren't original. It really is that facade. And I don't know what else. If it wasn't for the facade, this would be an easier one to say, to remove. So I struggle along with the rest of yous, but I definitely wanted to, maybe we should confirm that the owners are actually planning on building a new house, so then that would take away the option of allowing a surplus land severance.
Yeah, and I think that's what I heard. Is that accurate?
Not on this lot. So I want to be clear that
Here, just come up to the front. If it was more than one word, you got to come to the front.
Thank you very much. So I just want to be clear that it's not on this lot. So on this lot, there is no new home proposed. On an adjacent lot, there is a building permit out for a new house. And so I just want to be clear on that point, just from a planning perspective, that it's not on this particular lot that a new home is being proposed. There's a desire to utilize this property for the barn and other things and farming purposes and that sort of thing, but there's no new home on this lot. And, you know, one of the other things that my clients did research on was, you know, just a kilometer down the road, for example, there's a very historical Wallace family that owns property just down the road from this particular house, about a kilometer away. And I think, again, looking at the contextual value of those sorts of properties, you know, I would at least submit that there are a number of properties in this area which the township can protect and preserve. Again, I would just submit that this is not one of them.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. Then I looked to council, I guess, and this is one of the questions which makes it even more difficult, is the house quite literally could just be registered or designated and fall apart. And I think that's one of the parts where I really struggle with, is we could designate today and have a building demolition permit in 20 years because it just falls apart. So I guess there's the real difficult part. Unless they desire to sever, a designation means nothing unless we can hold Tim teeth behind it and put it there. So how does council expect to do anything? Because once you designate it, where do we go from there? So those are some of the things that we need to consider outside of the realm of what Heritage Committee considers and in the recommendation. Thanks.
Councillor Kitchen?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few more questions for Mariana. In the report from the lawyer, Mr. Davis, he is claiming that the three criteria that the Heritage Committee used are not really significant. I'd like you to comment on that. The second thing I'd like you to comment on is this a similar situation where, let's say, like the Bellwood Schoolhouse, where we have a very dilapidated and neglected building, but that was designated and now has new owners and is being restored?
So thank you. Through you, maybe I'll do the second question first, is that the reason that the Heritage Committee doesn't really look beyond the heritage value is because virtually any property can be restored. It comes down to resources, you know, money and craftsmanship. So yes, such as in the Bellwood Schoolhouse, in that case, it was very dilapidated and now is under new ownership who has full plans to restore the building and put a new use back into it. So that is definitely an option, and we saw that with the McNabb Street property as well, with the old schoolhouse that was basically, they were proposing demolition, and council designated the property, and now it's formed part of the new house that's on the property as well. So there are some success stories, and it's definitely possible. So that is, you know, that's the way the Heritage Committee looks at it, is that nothing is really beyond repair. It comes down to the resources, and that's council's tasked with that difficult decision of whether, you know, to force the owner to have to abide by that. But in terms of the first question, heritage value can be somewhat subjective. The province does their best to provide the criteria that we look at. But there was some reference made a few times to it not being unique. I think what we see here is the typical farmhouse, as I said previously, is a certain style. It's you know, kind of a one and a half story. They're dotted all over the landscape. This style has some aesthetic quality to it. It's a Queen Anne style. It's a little bit more unique. It definitely has a lot more decorative elements with the carved wood porches and the brackets, and is a very appealing looking facade. You know, that we can I guess we can debate it a little bit. There is definitely historical associations to this property. There are some quotes that were provided in the research as well about this family. There was questions about whether the family was a prominent local family, given that they were there for 5 generations and that many of them were in public service and served on many boards and committees. I would argue that there was historical associative value with the family and this property. And also in a lot of the submissions that I received to date, people in the community, the neighbors have actually come forward and said, this is a local landmark, this is at the top of the hill. There were comments made about that there are no views from this property, but we were out there ourselves when we stood with the Heritage Committee. We stood outside the house and looked down that very long tree-lined drive, the trees that are about 100 years old. I think there are significant views towards the surrounding farmland and from people driving down the road sort of to this property. You may not see the house clearly, but you can see that it is an intact farmstead. And that's what we're actually trying to protect now through our cultural heritage landscape study. We're trying to identify these particularly rural areas that have some unique features and that tell the story. And I mean, the question always comes down to which ones do you keep and how many do you keep to be able to tell the story to future generations. So it is challenging, but the criteria and the way they're met can sometimes be debated, and that's what's happening here a little bit. But the committee feels that it is satisfied. And like I said before, only one criterion needs to actually be met. It doesn't need to meet all 3, it only needs to meet 1.
Councillor Kitchus, following.
The permit to build is not on this property, as I understand. So the house could be designated, but isn't there, with our new bylaw enforcement requirements to keep certain things up to date? Is that true?
Thank you. Through you, yes. So we have a property standards bylaw that was recently updated, and if the property is designated, the identified heritage attributes, which would be listed in the bylaw, actually would have to be maintained. So there could be enforcement issues with that in terms of them maintaining those attributes. And the building permit is actually on the adjacent property that once formed part of this farm. So it was originally about 100 acres, and then the Sullivan family purchased the additional about 100 acres. So it was about a 200-acre farm, which was severed again afterwards. But right now it's 2 separate parcels. The building permit is on the adjacent parcel to the east. If you bring up the aerial photo, you can actually see where that construction is taking place now. So they have a permit issued now to build their new home, and that is currently underway and substantially constructed.
No, Councillor Dunsmore?
So Mariana, you said there that if we designate this and it has to be maintained, and Councillor Kitchus brought up the property standards, it would have to be maintained to heritage standards. So my question then relates to the repairs that have been done so far that didn't meet heritage standards. Are we then going to force this couple to, in addition to the $510,000, we're going to have to take the chimney back to original builds and replace the windows with more heritage appropriate windows?
Thank you. Through you, no, it doesn't work that way. We wouldn't require, we typically don't ever require somebody to take something back to its previous glory, so to speak. Restoration, it's sort of forward moving, so we would for sure ask them to keep it dry. So a roof, but as they proceed with any new work, we would look at heritage principles. So if they want to put on a large addition, we would look at how they should do that in terms of guiding principles for heritage conservation, where it should be located. We would never ask them to go back and restore something. It's sort of about moving forward, and then what they propose to do moving forward, how that is done.
Councillor Kitchus?
So, Mariana, can this property, the house and the laneway, which seems to be the kind of feature, could that be severed from this lot? And then the barn still be part of the other farm?
Through you, yes, there's potential for that. I wouldn't want to say like confirm it in any way, but there is potential to look at that if an application is made. I think there is potential. Could you bring up the aerial photo with the photography? That shows that there is some potential for a laneway to be carved out, and then an area for the house, kind of like a key-shaped lot. The barn, there was some reference to it being, the balance of lands would have to be rezoned to not allow a dwelling, which is fine because they aren't proposing a dwelling on this property, an additional dwelling, since they have the dwelling next door. So that's really the only caveat, is that it would have to be rezoned to not allow a dwelling. So if you can see directly to the east of the house, there's sort of a flat area. That's the area where the new house is being constructed on the separate lot. And the way that property line juts out, that was from a lot line adjustment that was recently done in order to provide buildable area and, I believe, a new driveway for the new house to the east, because there's a creek just east of this that you can't see on the screen, and there's Grand River Conservation regulated area there and associated with floodplains, so they couldn't get a proper buildable area or a driveway without doing a lot line adjustment.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Mariana, what sort of financial incentives are currently available to owners of heritage properties? I mean, we're talking about, first of all, they got to maintain it to our property standards bylaw. Secondly, you need to follow certain heritage preservation techniques. So what do we as a community offer to owners of these buildings?
Thank you. Through you, we currently don't have incentives other than through our community improvement plan, but those would be available to all properties that qualify, not just heritage properties. But they do get a higher amount if they are heritage. What we are exploring right now, and through the community improvement plan, there was recommendations made for us to bring forward heritage tax incentive program. So the Heritage Committee is actually going to be working on that and bringing that forward to council this year, hopefully this fall or winter, in terms of a heritage tax incentive program and a heritage grant and loan program.
Follow on, Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. So Mary, I'm just curious, in terms of total dollar amount, what's the most that someone could expect to get?
Thank you. Through you, we don't have those details yet. We would just be looking at that now, but currently under the Community Improvement Plan Fund, for example, an owner is eligible for $10,000 or up to $12,000 if it's heritage, and which is upwards of 50% of the cost of the work that's being completed.
So in the future, that'll come to council, and that'll be a policy decision for council, because you're saying taxpayers will be subsidizing people who own heritage properties. So that would be a policy decision that this council would have to make. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. Mariana, can you, I guess this is part of the difficulty thing, is because we also spoke about this at Heritage, at what point do we decide what is the structural pieces that we value, right? And that happens after the fact, not before the fact. I think it's somewhat difficult to decide why it has that heritage value when we haven't really, I don't know how we determine that now. At least to add that to the conversation. And then one other thing, if I can add that, it seems like we're a little bit almost behind the cart here, because it feels like, if you look at the farmstead, we use the word cultural heritage farmstead, where the new house is, I understood maybe they were building a new one on there as well, but the new house that's on that dirt patch, you can see, looks like it's kind of joining the whole farmstead together again. And if we're asking them to do a key lot severance, then they'll have another home in their backyard. And I think that difficulty is the house is almost built in that section, and now we're at the aspect of saying, well, if you do a key lot adjustment, you welcome to the neighborhood. So I think that's the difficult part, right? And yet, like this, it's not easy. So if you could speak towards that, the heritage, how the committee would go through if we designated it to determine what's left on that.
Thank you. Through you, we if you look at the statement of value, it does have a list of heritage attributes that have been identified. So those would be the elements that sort of are good, like quality craftsmanship, or that make it unique, or that make it aesthetically pleasing or true to its time in terms of that style. So those have been listed. But again, this is sort of a preliminary statement of value upon which a designation bylaw would be based. So there is no bylaw before you today because this is just the notice that would go in the paper. So there's just, the notice requirements are just a description explaining what the property is, what its values are, and then a list of heritage attributes that are identified at this point. But what happens is we typically would work with the owner to identify which elements should be retained and could be protected over the long term, and so that it's clear which physical elements actually speak to the property and what heritage attributes actually are.
So just to confirm for everybody here that every single property that is designated as a heritage property in Center Wellington will have its own bylaw that clearly identifies those heritage features if the council would move ahead to designate a property. Right? Okay.
That's right.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Kelly. I had the opportunity to speak to Ms. Donkers about the property, and I drove by it and had a look, and like Steve mentioned earlier, from 6th line, you really have to stop and look for the house because it's hidden behind the trees. Beautiful driveway, beautiful barn, and I understand from Ms. Donkers that the intent is to do some rehabilitation on the barn to bring it up to spec and to be usable, and preserve the heritage of the barn, the bank barn, which actually are getting to be more rare in the township than farmhouses. So I think the farmscape part of it is actually being retained or planning to be retained. As far it's just the house itself that is in such need of repair and has, you know, a single small bathroom for a family of 7 is pretty limiting. I know that my wife and I wouldn't want it, so I don't know how you could do it with 7 people with a single bathroom like the current house has. So I think, you know, preserving the house is putting a burden on the existing family that is on the owners that is beyond what heritage is meant to do. That's my own perspective.
Anything else from council? Okay, I think this is a real difficult one. We all recognize that we want to keep our heritage assets intact, but at the same point, we have a practice of not moving ahead with designations if the property owner isn't willing and doesn't want to do that. So that makes this a very difficult case. So we really, as a council, we have to balance off what kind of onerous requirements we're putting on property owners with our intent to make sure that we're looking after our heritage structure. This is a real tough one. So anything else from council before we take a vote on this? Councillor Kitchus, one last thing.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to agree that this is a very difficult decision. The financials to restore with the estimates given seem very onerous, and as a result, and also the owners not really enthusiastic about it, make it a difficult decision to agree to designate. At the same time, we have a mandate for heritage. We have had other cases where they have been dilapidated. This is possible to sever. Someone else could take over it and make it a beauty. and they wouldn't have any cost. So there is that potential. I think the municipality probably would be open to that. And I've 4 years ago, we had a property that also was very, very dilapidated, and we had estimates and very large. And there's still logs out there somewhere being held for the Edwards house. And I sort of regret that decision. I was one of the swings decisions on that. And I feel that this here is another case where there are other options. It's actually in probably much better condition than the Edwards house ever was. And it's in much better condition than the Bellwood Schoolhouse. I think that the Heritage Committee has, I think they have proven that there is historical significance in this building. I think that the particular architectural features of this building, with this Italian, I don't know what they call it, but it's sort of a certain style. I don't see that in the other pictures of yellow brick buildings. I don't think being able to see it from the road is really what the issue is about, whether you can see the house or not. There's some properties that are like myself, or you wouldn't be able to see it from the road ever. And so it's not about that the heritage is part of it. It's about whether somebody will preserve this historical significance. And this is for Ennetville and Ponsonby. Those are all smaller communities in our municipalities. So I am for designating this. I wish there was much better support for homeowners financially. I would like to sort of see that moving forward. I have seen, of course, Toronto's much different in heritage. They do provide extremely large funds to do roofs and all sorts of things. So that would be my decision on this. I would lean towards designation. I don't like to make mistakes in these, because every time we have one of these presented, there's always a case where there's another one, but eventually there are other ones, and that's a problem. The people that own this, they are building a new house, and it's on a different property, and they don't need this house taken down to build their new home, and that's important.
Okay, anything else from council? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Your Worship. Members of council, I've just returned from the FCM conference in Quebec City. And one of the great things about Quebec City is they've done an admirable, amazing job of preserving heritage buildings. And I think we have to consider that part of our duty is to preserve heritage buildings for the benefit of future generations. So I think we need to be mindful of that. So this is a very difficult decision because it's a piece of private property, but all factors in, I do think that I would like to support designating that for that important reason, that we preserve our heritage for the future generations to enjoy.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks, and again, I'd have to say I struggle a lot with this house because I actually like the design of it. One of the things that keeps coming back to me over and over and over, and I keep thinking, this is for the public. We're here to protect the public's enjoyment of our things and for the future benefits and for this. And I think to myself, but we can't see it. But you can't. It's stuck right beside this. Now this other home is there. It's there. How do we enjoy it? And I think that's the question I go, when we protect something, when we look at the downtown homes that we've had to deal with, people enjoy it. They walk by it. When we look at the Bellwood Schoolhouse, they see it, they enjoy it. It's part of, and I think that is actually probably the deciding mark for me as we go through this conversation, because I have to admit, I almost came here thinking we should designate this, but if the public can't enjoy it, and it doesn't, and we're gonna send bylaw officers to deal with this, we're gonna be spending taxpayers' time and money to go through all of this aspect, and it still comes with nothing more to the public. I don't see why we would do this. There is no future enjoyment for this house, for the public, and I think that's the deciding for me. Thanks.
I did hear something today that I think members, when we go through the budgeting process next year, make sure you bring this to the table, as that is using taxpayers' dollars to subsidize designations, because we haven't done that in the past, and that is a change from our current policy. So when we talk about incentives for property owners, make sure that you put your money where your mouth is during the next budget process, and identify where tax dollars can be spent for incentives to heritage, because there's no pot of money that just we control that isn't put there by taxpayers. So like to hear that in the next budget process. I'm going to read the recommendation. The Council of the Township of Center Wellington refused the owner's request to demolish the detached dwelling at 75356 line, formerly in the Township of Nichol, and that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington state its intention to designate the property 75356 line, formerly in the Township of Nichol, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act as a property of cultural heritage. Do you all understand the motion? So this is to refuse the request to demolish and to designate. All in favor of refusing? I know. Oh, sorry. I meant to say mover for that recommendation, Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Kittredge. All in favor of that motion? Opposed? And that is defeated. Okay. So then I have another motion here to make it clear that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approved the request that for demolition for the dwelling at the listed property municipally known as 75356 line in Nichol. Mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McElwain. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carries. Okay. Thank you very much for everybody who came here. Appreciate the delegations. Appreciate this was a difficult decision for council, but we've made our decision as a council. Moving on to 7.4, Community Improvement Plan, Annual Monitoring Report from our Economic Development Officer, Pat Rutter. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is my annual opportunity to bring you up to date on the activities of the Community Improvement Plan. The annual monitoring report allows me to talk to you about the incentives that we have offered in the past year and add any priority sites that we want to include in the coming year. The past year, we had 6 projects under the Community Improvement Plan under Level 1, which are largely were facade improvement programs. You may have seen them downtown. Broderick's Apparel, Sweet Distractions in downtown Elora. In all, we had 4 in Fergus and 2 in Elora. But what I really wanted to talk to you about today is some proactive activities that we're taking with the Priority Sites program. Priority sites are sites that are designated by council under recommendation of the Economic Development Task Force and are, without being designated as a priority sites, we cannot offer the larger, higher order incentives, such as the tax increment, brownfield, or a level 2 facade improvement. The Economic Development Task Force has been taking a proactive approach with these properties, as the township does have a lack of commercial land. So we have established a subcommittee to deal with priority sites. They have met several times and have been scouring the map of properties in Centre Wellington and have come up with a list that they would like to add to the list of priority sites to this point. If they get added, the subcommittee will then proactively take some action on these sites by visiting property owners to talk about outline opportunities that could be available to redevelop, reuse some of these properties. We are looking to provide feature sheets for each outlined property that provides information on development credits, that provides information on what additional densities would be allowed on a property, what is allowed currently under zoning, and what a tax increment grant might look like. But none of that is offering those incentives to a property is not necessarily a done deal just because we put them on the list of priority sites. But right now, we are asking that several priority sites be added to the list. 599 Hill Street West in Fergus, which is the A.O. Smith property, largely for preserving and using some of the heritage values on that property, as well as it is a large property that could have some substantial redevelopment opportunities. 350 St. Andrew Street West in Fergus, which is the former doctor's office beside the Melville United Church, is definitely an underutilized property. 680 St. David Street North in Fergus, which is Morris Auto. It is an underutilized property. 684 St. David Street North in Fergus, which is the Golden Fish and Chips, as an underutilized property. 920 and 930 St. David Street North in Fergus. One of those properties is a strip mall at the corner of Gordon and St. David, and the other is the former fuel depot site, which was definitely be a brownfield. 197 Beatty Line in Fergus, which is currently Sharp feed, but it is definitely an underutilized site, and given the activities that's happening in that area of town with the new hospital and the new subdivision, it is probably going to be a corridor for some commercial activity. 355 Wellington Road 18, which is the Laura Racket Club, which is currently under sale, but is definitely an underutilized site. And 16 East Mill Street in Elora, which is the strip mall, is underutilized in that it would, higher densities and a higher use could be on that site, including some additional residential. So those are the properties that the Economic Development Task Force has identified to add to the list in 2019. And they have also recommended taking off 101 St. Andrew Street West, which is the Vault Coffee Shop building, as it has received its Level 2 facade improvement program and will probably not require any additional incentives. Any questions?
Thanks, Pat. Just refresh your memory on why we need to make these priority sites in order to do what?
Council has to add these to the priority sites list in order to make them eligible for the higher order incentives, which are the TIGs, tax increment equivalent grants, brownfield grants, and the higher level facade improvement program, which is a $20,000 facade improvement program. Council, these still would come to council for approval if they do have a redevelopment project that meets our criteria, and we felt we wanted to offer a TIG. Those would still come to council for the council to approve or deny as well.
Thanks, Pat. Is everybody clear on why we have to make these priority sites, or why the Economic Development Task Force moved ahead? Councillor McLean?
Thanks, Kelly. I'm not sure, actually, and where I'm not sure, Pat, is for properties, I mean, have these been discussed with the current property owners?
Not as of yet.
Okay. So I guess that's why I have a question, because if we designate them and just pick out, Morris Auto or Golden Fish and Chips, either one of those, as underutilized properties, there is an existing business sitting there doing business, and we are all of a sudden going to identify those businesses as as a priority for getting grants to upgrade. Now, if Morris Auto, for instance, said, okay, I want to make my garage look prettier, I can get $20,000 to do that, or does it need to be upgraded to a multi-purpose site, or what are the criteria for actually getting the money?
Just because they're designated as a priority site does not mean that we would necessarily even offer incentives to them. It just means that they are available should a development come up on those properties that provides a greater economic impact to the community, such as in order to be a priority site, you have to be have frontage on the Grand River, or be a known brownfield property, or it has significant heritage value, or is it vacant and underutilized and has the potential for significant development or redevelopment. But this site would then have to meet targets and policies under the provincial growth plan, accommodate job growth, or provide exceptional design standards, or help achieve other local economic development goals or priorities that council had set. So just because we make it a priority site does not mean that they would necessarily be offered. They would have to meet some additional criteria, as well as it doesn't affect the current businesses or the current property usage in any way. It just makes it if someone comes to us, if they decide to sell the property, someone comes to us and says they have they'd like to redevelop this property, it's an opportunity for us to encourage certain activities on those properties.
I think a key point here is we're trying to be proactive and not just be reactive to a development opportunity that comes our way. So we're trying to be proactive in identifying those areas where it's clearly underutilized, or it's a brownfield or something like that, so that this council says, yeah, this is an area that could be doing more for the town. And then when it's identified, when a plan comes to council, all those things have to go through council in much more rigorous method in order to make sure that they are eligible for whatever grants. But this is us being proactive in identifying those properties so that we kind of are thinking about them already. Councilor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering about some of these, you're saying underutilized. For instance, like 16 Mill Street, Laura, like every one of those, I guess, units are used. And so I don't understand what that would, like they're all, and they've been there for quite a while.
I agree. All of those units commercial units are in use, and we would continue to want them to be in use. That property could handle additional densities, meaning that it's commercial property, so residential would be allowed on additional stories, much like the Carker Gallery is right next door to them. So there is an opportunity there if the owner or a subsequent owner wanted to do more on that property. There is the opportunity for that to happen.
In addition, it could be made a little prettier. I mean, it's right downtown Aurora, right?
Yes.
And I think that came into the criteria when they were looking at this. Anything else from council on this one? Okay, I read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Center Wellington to add the properties at 599 Hill Street West, Fergus, 350 St. Andrew Street West, Fergus, 680 and 684 St. David Street North, Fergus, 920 and 930 St. David Street North, Fergus, 197 BD Line, Fergus, 165 Getty Street, Elora, 16 East Mill Street, Elora, and 355 Wellington Road, 18 to the list of priority sites as required under the Community Improvement Plan Implementation Report, PLN 2015-12, and remove 101 St. Andrew Street West from the priority sites list. And that council authorizes the use of level 2 financial incentives for these properties as indicated, subject to additional approval by council on an individual property basis. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks, Pat. 7.5, Strategic Asset Management Policy. We have a report from Dan. Welcome, Dan. Wait, do we need a 2-minute break? Yeah, it seems like everybody's getting a little fidgety. Okay, let's take a 3.5-minute break. Sorry, Dan, I know you were up there. You're ready to go. Okay, we're back at it. So the strategic asset management policy. Again, welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This report is the township's continuing efforts to be compliant with asset management legislation. In 2016, the province passed the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act that made asset management a requirement for public sector entities in Ontario. More recently, in 2017, the province passed Ontario Regulation 58817, which is attached as Schedule B to this report, that gives more specific requirements in regards to asset management planning for municipalities in Ontario. In this regulation, there are various requirements, more of a phased-in approach to be fully compliant with the regulation itself, where the first actual requirement is by July 1st of 2019, you must have a strategic asset management policy in place and approved by council. That is the intent of this report, but moving beyond that initial compliance requirement, we have various other requirements in 2021, 2023, and 2024 to be fully compliant with the legislation, and that includes having a more comprehensive and integrated asset management plan in place. The specifics that are outlined in Regulation 58817, there's some fairly specific requirements when it comes to the strategic asset management policy itself, and I've outlined those within my report. The Asset Management Committee put a lot of hard work in developing this and are continuing to put a lot of work into a plan to be fully compliant by the deadline for each of the different requirements of the regulation. But just to go through some of the high-level components of the policy itself and the importance of the policy itself, it speaks of continuous improvement, which means we have an obligation to continuously improve our asset management practices and policies within the township. It talks about coordinating asset management practices with other entities such as the county and neighboring municipalities. It talks about strategic alignment, which is aligning our asset management planning practices strategically, such as with the township strategic plan, with community planning documents such as official plans, secondary plans, and various master plans, and integration with the budget and long-term forecast, which we are fortunate the township has been very progressive in this area for the last number of years. We've had a formal asset management plan in place since 2013, but I've been doing asset management planning practices well before that. But this is looking for more integration in all of these initiatives. Section 3 of the policy talks about guiding principles that guide asset management planning. These are guiding principles that are right out of the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act. So these are directly required principles that we must follow, and from an asset management perspective, they do make sense. Section 4 is governance, outlining the roles and responsibilities of the various people within the township, including the role of council, the role of the Chief Administrative Officer, which in this case we are making the executive lead of the asset management planning process, which is showing that asset management planning is very much a corporate initiative, and since it's a corporate initiative, we want the CAO to be the executive lead. The role of the senior management team and the role of the asset management committee that we have established, representing every department within the organization, reporting up to the senior management team through the CAO directly to council. Section 5 is stakeholder engagement, where we are required to engage local residents and stakeholders and other stakeholders within the township when it comes to asset management planning. And Section 6 relates to the development of asset management plans, which we are in the middle of doing an update to our asset management plan now. Our last asset management plan was done in 2016. staff feel that it's beneficial to put a 2019 or 2020 asset management plan in place as a intermediary step before we become fully compliant with the regulation itself. So these are short-term steps in order to achieve that. Schedule A to the bylaw shows the breakdown of the structure of asset management planning within the organization and how the asset management committee reports up, eventually reporting to the managing directors group. And like I said earlier, Ontario Regulation 588.17 is contained within attachment B to the report. In terms of next steps, once we have an asset management policy in place, the next goal of the asset management committee is to work with various departments to meet the 2021 compliance initiative, which is to have an asset management plan in place that meets all of the requirements of the regulation for core infrastructure, which are your bridges, road, water, wastewater, and storm assets. So that will require resources at some point that we will be bringing forward to council either in a report or as part of a budget process. That will probably require staffing, which we outlined in the staffing strategy within the 2019 budget. And it'll also require some type of tool or resource, software-related resource to help with coordinating all the asset data and generating the necessary results to create and maintain an asset management plan. Wasn't going to go into too much more detail, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that council has.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for this report. Very detailed and well thought out, and appreciate it. Especially like the management committee, asset management committee structure, because I know a lot of asset management programs fall apart because you don't hard code it in the organizational structure, and you can see how it rolls up to the right kind of accountability, but it's integrated into each of the different departments, the functional areas. So I think this is really, really solid, and I think you know, thinking about the county moving ahead with the efficiency review, that this is something that could potentially be shared with the other municipalities in the county as something that they haven't done yet. So that's I think this is good work that kind of has us leading as far as the county goes. So good work. Councillor McLean?
Kelly, in your under roles and responsibilities, Dan, first of all, it's a great report and it covers the asset management policy quite well. I think it explains some things that I wasn't quite aware of before, so that's goodness. Under roles and responsibilities, under the role of council, one of the Part C says understanding and utilizing the asset management plan to aid in decision-making, including setting priorities and approving the annual budget. Now, this is kind of an area that I have been asking questions about before with the setting priorities part, because the priorities have already been set before they come to council. And so my question, I guess, is there some intent for council to be involved in that process earlier than we are today?
Through Mayor Linton, I guess, first of all, from a prioritization perspective, the asset management plan does provide a really clear way of prioritizing asset needs in all areas of the organization. So a clear example of that is our bridge plan and how priorities are pretty much calculated on an annual basis to come up with what are the priorities from a bridge and culvert perspective across the organization, and that is a very useful tool in setting the budget from year to year. It wasn't intended at this point that council would be directly involved in setting priorities. It would be a priority setting exercise developed through the asset management planning process that is approved ultimately by council. So it's having the prioritization piece sort of set by staff and if there's any consultants assisting staff, and then having council sign off on that approach. But the intent is to be consistent in the application of being, or setting priorities.
Andy?
Just to add, so council does go through all the master plans and approves and receives those master plans. They're all then fed into the asset management with all the other reports. And through our strategic planning process that council goes through at the beginning of the term, that's where council sets the direction as to what our overall guiding strategic actions and priorities are. So staff do take that list and say, you know, here's what council would like to see accomplished. Now we draw back into those priorities within the capital identified in the asset management plan, within the various master plans, and bring forward those projects based on what council has set as a strategic action plan for the 4 years.
But that being the case, still during the last budget cycle, and I imagine this will be the same, is we decided to move a project out of urban Elora and put it into a gravel roads process. So even though we go ahead and we have asset management plans, we have all the roads condition studies and the things that go into managing our assets, council at the end of the day has the ability to change those priorities. And so I think that role kind of, you know, fits into there. Dan?
Yeah, and just to add to that, there is a requirement through the new regulation for annual reporting to council on the progress of the asset management plan. So to the extent where priorities change or maybe funding is not made available in relation to the recommendations of the asset management plan, we must report to council on that on an annual basis. So that will be a way of tracking progress of the asset management plan in relation to passing budgets, for example.
And just refresh our memories about the increased importance that the province is putting on asset management.
Through the regulation, there are reasons why you need to be compliant with the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act and the regulation. The first reason behind that is it's a mandatory requirement for applying for provincial grants. To apply for a provincial grant, you must attach an asset management plan, a compliant asset management plan to that grant application. Number two, you must have an asset management plan in order to continue to receive federal gas tax funds. So those are two reasons coming from the federal and provincial governments indicating that asset management is now a requirement. But I do see there are more internal benefits than those two external benefits.
Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Kelly. Dan, does this plan going to help at all with, I'm thinking about amortization and depreciation calculations. It's going to help us get a better track on the life cycle, remaining useful life of our assets. Is it going to help also with financial reporting, and will we ever see a day where we see an amortization expense showing on any of our operational things?
Through Mayor Linton, yeah, that's a really good question. There's a lot of discussion around municipalities around the difference between accounting for assets and asset management planning for assets. And the two are somewhat related in that you can try to make a correlation between how an asset amortizes and how much you should be saving annually to replace that asset. But the problem is accounting for assets is in historical cost valuation, where asset management planning is in future replacement cost valuation. So if you decided, okay, I have a road that we're amortizing at $10,000 a year. If I save $10,000 a year over its life, I should be able to replace it. Well, no, because there's been 50, 60, 70, 80 years worth of inflation attached to that on an annual basis, and you'll be severely underfunded. So the common belief is that asset management planning is sort of an independent item compared to accounting for assets because of the difference between historical cost valuation and replacement cost valuation. However, we do have to report annually on why we don't budget for amortization. And quite simply, it's because we want to plan for the replacement of our assets based on asset management planning, and we want to account for them and amortize them based on accounting related practices, and really we should be keeping them separate.
Councillor Kitchers?
Thank you, Mayor. Is there any way that this asset management plan in any way melds with any development charges? I know development charges are for new assets, but when you're looking at replacements, how's the province looking at that? Or is there any future considerations of that?
Yeah, through Mayor Linton, that's another really good question. Changes to the Development Charges Act 3 years ago linked asset management planning to the Development Charges Act. And they did that in that they don't want a municipality to put a major asset in their DC study and not be able to afford the future life cycle costs of that asset. So when you do a development charge study now and going forward, you must prove that the municipality can afford the future life cycle costs of the assets within the development charge study. So it's not just a matter of using DCs to put that initial asset in place. It's being able to operate, maintain, rehabilitate, and eventually replace that asset in the future. So it's being mindful of the true cost of having an asset plate in place, not just using DCs without recognizing that.
Anything else from council? Thank you very much, Dan. Recommendation is that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington pass a bylaw to adopt the strategic asset management policy for the corporation. I move for that recommendation. Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor McLean. All in favor? And that is carried. Application of a noise bylaw exemption. We have a report from Lisa there. Any questions for Lisa? Okay, I move the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approves the request from John Howie for an exemption to bylaw 5001-05, the noise bylaw for the Township of Centre Wellington, to permit the amplification of music at 370 Thistle Street, Fergus, on August 17, 2019, between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. for a wedding reception, and that the applicant ensure that neighboring property owners are notified in advance of the event. I'll move for that. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favor? And the party is on. 7.7, amended Code of Conduct. And we have a report from our clerk. Carrie?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Linton, in October 2017, Council will recall they adopted a code of conduct and retained the services of the Integrity Commissioner, Guy DiGiorno. At a meeting with staff, or Council will also remember at that meeting, they asked staff to ensure that the Code of Conduct was reviewed by the Integrity Commissioner. At a meeting with staff from the County of Wellington and area municipalities, Mr. DiGiorno outlined the key elements to be included in a Code of Conduct, which included provisions to address use of influence, interference with staff, use of property and resources, handling of confidential information, gifts, hospitality, benefits, respectful conduct, discrimination, harassment, etc. Mr. DiGiorno provided staff at that meeting with a template in order for the County of Wellington and all the area municipalities to develop similar codes and complaint protocols. Council should also note that Mr. DiGiorno has introduced an informal complaint procedure where members can attempt to resolve matters on their own or with the assistance of the IC as a mediator, or follow a formal complaint procedure that requires the complaint to be filed in writing and submitted directly to the IC.
Thanks, Carrie. Can you just refresh our memories as to why we need to have a code of conduct?
Through you, yes. Bill 68, as effective March 2019, requires every municipality to adopt a code of conduct and retain the services of an integrity commissioner, or at least have ability to access one. That's provincial legislation.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, questions from council? Okay, Councillor McRae.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I guess I don't know if this is the appropriate place, but I was interested in introducing a motion to accept this policy as information to afford council more time to consider its content, its intent, and ramifications. I'm suggesting that councilors would review and provide to the clerk written comments regarding questions and/or proposed amendments to the document. Their written feedback along with responses would be circulated to the council before the policy's reintroduction.
Okay, so you're asking for a deferral with that direction.
Yes, just based on my own review, I've got a number of written comments, and I think it's easier to pass in written comments for review and consideration rather than trying to trade things back and forth in open session.
Seconder for a deferral, because there's Councillor McElwain. Any additional discussion on the request to defer? Pardon? Oh, no discussion, sorry, thanks. Lisa tells, Carrie tells me.
I'm still thinking, I'm still thinking about what.
So we do, so we do have a code of conduct right now, and the recommendation that we have is from our integrity commissioner to kind of bump that up a bit and make it a little bit more specific. So what we need a deferral. We need a bit of a time frame. We need a little bit. Do you have any direction at all based on that, or?
Well, through you, maybe I could get a little bit of clarification. Does council want me to incorporate the comments that I receive and then they can see the proposed changes in red line, or do they want me to make a judgment call as to whether it's appropriate to put those in, or how do you wish me to proceed?
That's great.
What I was thinking is that if everyone submits their own comments, like, for example, I'm using Word, I put in my comments beside so you can see it. So maybe if it was everything went in through you and then you send out our comments so we can all see, and then we meet again to decide what parts do we like that we'd like to see incorporated in the final document.
Through you, I'm wondering, perhaps Mr. DiGiorno should likely see a version first, and then we wouldn't have to go back and forth, because he provided this template. This is the template that he suggested. So if he has any issues with any of the changes, it might be appropriate to find that out before we pursue that avenue. So maybe I could see your changes, run them through him, and then bring back a report to council. Would that make sense?
Yeah, some of what I've got here is sort of questions asking for some further points of clarification, maybe where there's some examples of where it looks like something's been left out that maybe adding a little bit more would just clarify it more, that sort of thing.
Okay. So basically, we need more time to digest it and see what it means. Okay. Can we have a due date to get comments in to our clerk by a certain date? End this week, and the next week, 2 weeks? Just the date. All I want is a date right now. I don't want discussion about anything else except the date. 1 week Friday? June 28th. Are we okay to provide comments to Carrie June 28th? Then what she's going to do is she's going to go through them. So it sounds like some will be just questions and some will be suggestions. So how do you think you're going to handle those two things differently? I guess you'll have to figure it out when you get them. Otherwise, it's just conceptual talking about it right now. Are we okay next to 28th to have all our comments to Carrie if we want to see changes, questions to this? Yeah, head nods. Yeah, is it about the date? Okay, Councillor Kitchen.
I was wondering if citizens could provide feedback also at that date.
It's not enough time for citizens.
Through you, I would think the appropriate avenue for citizens would be to appear as delegations when the matter is considered by council.
That's okay with me. I mean, sure. So there will be a certain, how long will this process take if we have the June 28th?
Through you, depending on the comments that I receive, I would, and if whether or not it does have to go to the integrity commissioner or not, It may take, it could bring it back for July, or it could be September. There is no rush for this. We do have a code of conduct in place, but there was some urgency to get a code that the Integrity Commissioner felt he could, first of all, enforce.
Okay, so then it'll come back, we get our comments in, I mean, our clerk can't respond at what time yet until she sees what we're coming back with. So then following that, they'll make changes to, you'll throw that through our Integrity Commissioner, it'll come back at that point, it'll come back to council, and then we'll allow for delegations because it's something on the agenda.
Yep.
Everybody good with that? Okay, all in favor of the deferral? Okay, that passes. So the next piece is kind of related, but kind of separate. Another requirement is council staff relations policy, and we have our clerk to talk to that.
Through you, again, Bill 68 requires council to adopt and maintain a policy regarding the relationship between members of council, the officers, and employees of the corporation. The policy identifies the legislation, policies, procedures, and practices the municipality complies with in order to promote a respectful relationship between members of council and staff. The Township of Centre Wellington prides itself and is committed to promoting a respectful, tolerant, and harassment-free relationship and workplace between members of council, the officers, and employees of the corporation. The purpose of the policy is to outline the roles and working relationship that exists between council and staff. The policy outlines the role of council, the role of staff, and the role of council and staff collectively, the relationship and expectations, and a monitoring and contravention section. The policy also incorporates the work council and staff completed with JUICE to develop their team norms and the rules of thumb.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Questions, comments from council on this piece? Councilor McRae?
I'd like to do the same thing again for this as well, to defer it just to allow more time to review and provide comments.
Two things kind of go together, hand in hand. Okay, that's your feeling. Second, that deferral. Any discussion of the deferral? Oh, there is no discussion of deferral. Sorry, man. I learned without only one of our clerks saying something to me. All in favor of deferral? Same time frame? Okay, so get your comments in on this one on the 28th of June as well. Okay, that is defeated as well. Is deferred as well. Not defeated, deferred. Okay, moving on to 7.9, Community Services Facility Closure Schedule. And this was a requirement from council to look into opening at different times. And I will turn things over to Pat, who might turn things over again. Pat?
Yes, so I'd just like to introduce Bruce Parkin, who's our aquatic supervisor and acting manager of programs and customer service for the department. And he put the presentation together for CSAC and presented it there. He's going to provide you with a condensed version of that. In your package is the recommendation that is being forwarded to council from the CSAC committee, as well as the report that they received. So I'll turn it over to Bruce.
Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. So in our packages, we'll just get started with the report that we've put together. Basically, we've provided background information to assist in the decision-making process of whether to have our community services recreation facilities open or closed on statutory holidays throughout the year. Our objective today is to provide background information to council on our facility holiday schedule. So as Pat alluded to, some background on this. We brought the original schedule to council March 18th, 2019, and the following motion was made as is outlined on the screen.
So this schedule is found on page 5 of your report, and this was the schedule that was originally brought to council. Here you'll see basically the schedule has evolved over the years, really over the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years or more, and we've basically seen how attendance and how rentals have gone over certain holidays, and there have been changes over the years to this. A few of the notable changes have been for closures such as Victoria Day, Easter Monday, and Thanksgiving Monday. A couple things, again, I'd refer you to page 5 on your report. It's a little bit hard to see on the screen there, but a couple things to look at is Bellwood Hall is generally available most days. There's only 2 days a year that it is closed. That's Christmas and New Year's Day, and the rest of the year it is available for rentals based on demand. The other one is the Victoria Park Senior Center. Again, you'll see a series of closed dates on there. There is some availability for volunteer coordinators to open up that building for specific groups, and I will touch on that a little bit later on in the report. To start to put this report together, we kind of started to try and look at all the different ways and all the different factors that have helped us make these decisions over the years. When we look at statistics, we're going to review the costs involved with opening our facilities. We're going to look at rental statistics, so reviewing the overall availability and actual rentals of our halls, our ice, and floor time on holidays. We're going to look at usage statistics in areas such as the Aquatic Center, where we've got specific bather loads, specific numbers of patrons using our facilities over the holidays and other days. And we're going to look at ice rental statistics during the school Christmas holiday break. We chose not to do a public survey as it would not necessarily provide accurate information. It's very easy for people to say, yes, they'd come to a facility, but it doesn't actually relate to actual usage. So really we depended on historical statistics for that type of information. And just, well, again, to reflect true usage. Where possible, the information shows actual usage and demand of our facilities, and these are, again, some of the statistic information to help us come to our decision. We went to the Victoria Park Senior Center board for their feedback. We communicated with our winter minor sports organizations and surveyed and got their result. We asked for surveyed them for their requests, and we surveyed the Southwestern Ontario Rec Facilities Association and the Waterloo Wellington Regional Aquatic Council. So really it represents a number of municipalities and other not-for-profit recreation facilities throughout Southwestern Ontario to try and get a comparison of what others are doing on these holidays. So I'm going to touch a little bit on Bellwood Hall. Again, there's only 2 days a year that Bellwood Hall is not available to be opened. Currently, it's available for facility rentals with the exception of Christmas Day and New Year's Day. In 2017 and 2018, there was one rental on a statutory holiday in Bellwood Hall, and staff are not present during these rentals. So it's just kind of something we'll touch on as far as the rental, but we didn't feel it was a large part of this report, so just wanted to kind of touch on it right off the bat. Victoria Park Senior Center, again, volunteer coordinators can facilitate activities. So volunteers can go in, they can open up the building, and so if it's a card game or a smaller group, they can run that, let the participants in, lock the doors behind them at the end of the game or the activity, let the people out, lock the door behind them, and leave. Generally, the Victoria Park Senior Center is closed on weekends and holidays. Its general operating hours are Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, and again, there's the ability to have volunteer run activities on statutory holidays. Things get a little trickier when we move in with the Centre Wellington Community Sportsplex and the Elora Community Center. So really, the next sets of slides are going to look at our statistics, our specific holidays, and what happens at the ECC and the Sportsplex on these holidays. We're going to start off with 2 specific holidays. Family Day is a very unique holiday in our facilities. It's a holiday that was created, I believe, in 2008 was the first year for the Family Day holiday. Activities are really catered around, families are really looking for activities to do. The Sportsplex and the ECC operate regular hours those days, so it's similar to weekend programming. we're not running instructed programs per se, but all of the facilities are available. It's a very busy day in our centers. We see great demand for public skating. We get sponsored swim programs. The aquatic center is virtually always at capacity on those days, and there's certainly lots of popularity with the skating programs. So it's certainly our opinion the demand for usage justifies the cost of opening and programming on Family Day. Remembrance Day is another unique holiday. Remembrance Day is not a statutory holiday in Ontario. However, it is a negotiated holiday in the Centre Wellington Employee Memorandum of Agreement, and therefore subject to public holiday compensation provisions. The Sportsplex and Elora Community Centre operate regular hours, and all regular programs operate this day. So this is the only statutory holiday when we're running aquafit programs in the Aquatic Centre. We're running all of our swim lessons, and the customer service hours are the same as any other operating day. All programs run as normal. Again, the statistics really show us there's no difference than any other day. So the usage on those days certainly justifies the cost of opening and programming on Remembrance Day. This chart is on page 29 of your report, so I would certainly invite you to take a look at page 29. It does get a little bit small on the screen. What we've done here is we've presented a chart outlining the cost of operating township facilities on stat holidays. This one is for the Centre Wellington Sportsplex. We really struggled as there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. We've broken down the different levels of service and the number of staff it would take to provide the different levels of service available. On the right hand of the chart, we've got a breakdown of a 10-hour day and a breakdown of a full day. So a full operating day in the winter at the Sportsplex, staff are opening the building at 5:30 a.m. and they're closing up at 1 o'clock a.m. So when you're looking at a full day, it's the very far right-hand column. And if it's a shortened reduced day, so something like although not a stat holiday, Christmas Eve when they're closing early, it would be a shortened day. We have shortened days on the civic holiday Monday, as well as Thanksgiving Sunday, or a couple shortened days where we close earlier on the day based on demand. On the left-hand side, you'll see some staffing levels. So again, if just one staff is there to open the building, they could handle room rentals, they could have the weight room open. In the summer, they could be there for floor usage. Once we add in ice usage, there's the demand for the Zamboni, clearing the ice every hour. If you've got two pads going in Fergus, there's the Zambonis on one pad on the half hour, the other pad on the hour. You've really got the demand to have two staff present. When we move a little bit further down and we add in programs, if there's programs, we've got to have a customer service staff there to collect the money and collect revenue and be there to answer questions at our front desk. We base that those customer service hours on a weekend operating shift, so 11:30 to 3:30, so a 4-hour operating day for those reception staff. And again, if we're operating aquatic programs, it's based on a weekend schedule, which is 11:45 to 4. So it's a shortened day for the aquatic staff. Still requires 8 staff to be running a public swim on those days. Regardless of the program time of the aquatic center time, you can still have a shortened day, like a 10-hour operating day, or your full day from 5:30 till 1 o'clock in the morning. Currently, Easter Sunday and Thanksgiving Sunday, Civic Holiday Monday, and Christmas Eve are the days the Sportsplex closes early for. And the next chart's a little bit more straightforward. It outlines for the Elora Community Center. Based on the facilities available in Elora, we can really look at operating with 1 staff or 2 staff. So again, you'll see the same format with the level of service on the left-hand side. Total cost for a shortened day, so 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. would be an example of that, or the total cost for a full day, so 5:30 a.m. to midnight or 1 o'clock, depending on the season. So for considerations, staffing costs aren't the only costs on stat holidays. There is a premium rate for staffing, so it's more expensive to open our facilities. Specifically, it would cost more to open on Easter Monday because it's a statutory holiday, or Thanksgiving Monday, rather compared to Easter Sunday or Thanksgiving Sunday. Other costs are things like utilities, snow removal, caretaker services, other consumables, and general maintenance. We're always looking at that cost benefit, so whether the usage is going to justify the cost to open the facility. All of our rec facilities are subsidized through taxation, so we're certainly always trying to run as efficiently as we can based on the usage and demand for our facilities. The next 4 slides are going to illustrate a review of hall and ice rentals and the availability over the past 3 years on and around statutory holidays at the Centre Wellington Community Sportsplex and the Elora Community Sportsplex. You can also refer to page 30 to 33 of your report for copies of these. Basically, we're trying to provide demonstrated demand in these 2 facilities and the usage in these facilities. This first one is looking at 2018 and 2019 at the Centre Wellington Sportsplex. You'll see under hall availability, there's a range for hours, 18 to 36, 12 to 24. It's basically trying to illustrate the fact we've got 2 separate halls, so they can be opened up and rented as one hall, or split apart and have 2 separate halls, so you could have a variety of different programs running in there. When we look at Family Day, as we've talked about, it's a really busy day in our centers. For ice, as far as the hours, there's 36 hours of ice available, and 25 and a half hours were rented this past year. And if we look at 2018, 25 and a half hours were rented on Family Day as well. Hall usage is consistent. 6 hours this year, 10 hours last year. When we look at Remembrance Day, obviously we don't have the 2019 information yet, but if we look at 2018, we're looking at 30 of the 36 hours over the day was rented. You can go through some of the other statutory holidays, and obviously there's some reduced numbers in there when we look at total hours. When we look at Easter Sunday this year, we were open, so we're reduced day again, closing at 6 o'clock. We only had 4 hours of ice rentals, so this year Easter was in April, so we just had 1 ice pad going, but we only had 4 hours of ice rented on Easter Sunday, and no requests for hall rentals. That was consistent again with 2018, where we just had 1 hour of ice rental on Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday, obviously we were closed on the Monday and we were closed on the Friday, so we're only open 2 of the 4 days. So certainly something to keep in mind of being available at least 2 of the days, but even with the 2 closures, we're not bursting at the seams on the days that we're open. We're really seeing the similar information in 2017 and 2016. A lot of the same trends are in place with consistent use on Remembrance Day, consistent use on Family Day, and sporadic use when we look through the other holidays. When we pull up the Elora Community Center, we look at 2018, 2019 for that facility. Again, we can see consistent ice usage on Family Day. 15 of 18 hours are rented. Last year we were 13 of 18 hours. Consistent usage on Remembrance Day. There are times where the Elora Community Center is closed a little more often, and basically those closures are based on rentals. If we don't have rentals in the facility, we're not going to have a staff present in that building, and the usage has really shown that there's not always sufficient demand to have the center open. Again, that just reviews, again, it's in your report, but looking at 2017 and 2016 and those with those similar statistics for Elora. We were able to dig back, and again, this information is in your report on page 27. In the Aquatic Center, we're required to maintain bather loads and actual usage statistics, and obviously in the Aquatic Center, when there's aquatic staff on deck, there's always somebody monitoring the programs. So tracking statistics in the programs and having a very black and white picture of exact numbers is a little more straightforward in the Aquatic Center. On the ice, we don't have a facility person watching and you holding a clicker counting every single person that goes on and off the ice. On the ice, we're looking more at our user groups and how many hours they're renting, and we look more in as far as hours of rental. In the Aquatic Center, there's a lot more pay-as-you-go programs, so the individual usage statistics are certainly important there. So we track back. There's a number of years that we tracked back and provided in the report. On here, we've got 2017 and 2018. Yeah, and you'll see all the holidays are listed down the left-hand side. Really what I'd want you to draw your attention to is the totals. So you'll see a total about the middle of the screen for 2017, and then on the right-hand side for 2018, and then each holiday is listed. So when we look at Family Day, we can look across, we can see the swims were busy, especially the family swim, and we had a total of 339 people in the pool that day. In 2017, 2018 was 354. The very bottom line, we're going to see an annual average. What I did is I took the average for a Saturday or Sunday. The hours that we're running on the statutory holidays are similar to a Saturday or Sunday. So we're looking at that 11:45 to 4 o'clock swim. We took our numbers for the entire year on Saturday and Sunday and divided by the total number of days we were open. So our average in 2017 on a weekend was 100 people in a day. You can see Family Day, we were at 339, so it was a busy one. You look at something like Easter Sunday where we had 42, or Canada Day at 54, Thanksgiving Sunday 68. Certainly there's still decent numbers in there, but they're not hitting kind of what we would regularly expect on those days. If we look at 2018, again, we see similar numbers with really busy numbers on Family Day and reduced numbers as we go through Easter Sunday. Some decent usage over the summer with Canada Day and the civic holiday, and then low numbers again at Thanksgiving. We didn't put Remembrance Day in this information. Again, Remembrance Day is that one holiday where we're running all of our regular programs. It really doesn't fit into a weekend schedule. We're running all of our lessons, all the instructed programs, and the usage certainly is consistent and consistent with any other operating day. So the other thing we looked at is we pulled up our usage statistics and rentals over the Christmas holiday. A lot of this information we had to manually track back. So in these cases, staff went back and they looked up specific days, and they look up each ice pad, and they look up the halls. They look up at how many hours that those facilities were rented and counted those hours by hand. So it's not something that there was just kind of necessarily a report to pull up. As we look at this chart, we looked at the 2017-2018 Christmas holiday, so 2 years ago, and then the next page we're going to be looking at this past Christmas. What we did is we took that traditional time frame from December 24th to January 5th, when children are out of school, and just seeing what the usage numbers were on those specific days. Typically, if we look at a Saturday or a Sunday during the ice season, when the kids are out of school, our facilities are booked from 6:30 in the morning throughout the day with our minor sports groups. The number on the left-hand side of the column, so the left-hand side is the Fergus Sportsplex, the right-hand side is the Elora Community Center. The number on the left is the total number of hours that our facility was booked each of those days. The next column over is township skating programs. So that's going to include programs like our public skating. It's going to include parent-taught skating, parent-taught shinny, adult and senior skating, adult and senior shinny. Those hours are included in the total hours the arena was booked on the left-hand side. So if we look at December 24th, we can look that we had 11 hours of program time or rented time in the facility. One of those hours was a township skating program, and there was a total of 18 hours available that day for usage. If we look to the right with Elora, we had 5.5 hours of rentals, and there was a total availability of 9 hours that day. If we total it up over the full 2-week break that the facilities were open, obviously there's a few days that were closed with December 25th, 26th, and January 1st. There was a total hour of 496 hours available for ice. We rented 274 of those, leaving 221.5 hours of available ice. If we look at this past Christmas, the numbers are a little bit different. Again, the 490 total ice, so that's the hours between Pad A and Fergus, Pad B and Fergus, and the Elora Community Center. We have a total of 490 hours. We rented 370 hours this year, which is obviously an increase. There was only 119 hours, but that is 119 hours available in 10 days of free, open, and available ice that was unrented at on our 3 ice pads. Obviously that 100 is something, there's 100 hours difference. So if we look 2 years ago, we were about 220 hours of available ice. This year we were 119. can certainly raise some eyebrows. A couple things that were different this past year. Our facility bookings coordinator worked significantly with our township communication coordinator to advertise that ice on social media, trying to put a real push to get that ice rented. The other thing this past winter was a warmer winter, so a lot of our outdoor ice pads weren't on operation yet because it was a warmer winter. Outdoor activities weren't necessarily available because we weren't having the snow that we did 2 years ago and in previous winters to that. So, but even with that, I would say a significant increase in ice rentals. There's a significant amount of ice over that 2-week Christmas period available. So we went through and we surveyed our youth minor sports associations. So specifically, we went to the winter associations. We went to Center Wellington Minor Hockey. We went to the Grand River Girls Mustangs Hockey, Elora Fergus Ringette, the Elora Skating Club, Fergus Skating Club. We tried to get an idea of what they were interested at, what they were looking for rentals on specific holidays, or if there was interest. Easter Monday is a bit of a challenging one. Easter can occur in March or it can occur in April. A lot of our ice sports are wrapping up at the end of March, so they'll have their regular seasons, they'll have playoffs, they'll have different things going on, but they're really regularly booking ice until the end of March. So you could have a point if you had Easter in March, we could have 3 ice pads going, or in April you could just be down to 1 ice pad. So it just is really dependent on how the calendar works there. Really what we're looking for is kind of the general information we were getting back from the user groups. As much as we know that the ice pads are really in demand, if we look at the evening time frame, so 5 to 10 p.m. Monday to Friday, and we look throughout the weekends on Saturday, Sunday, there's huge demand. There's not so much demand for the ice on the statutory holidays. If you look at this past year, Easter Sunday, we had one organization request ice for ice. There was one organization who requested Easter Sunday ice, as shown on the chart. This past year, we had 4 hours of rentals. No minor sports groups rented ice in our facilities on Easter Sunday. For these charts, you can refer to pages 38 to 40 in your report. The next 4 slides illustrate a comparison of 52 different facilities throughout southwestern Ontario. So this was the comparison of facilities with the Southwestern Ontario Recreation Facility Association and the Waterloo Wellington Regional Aquatic Council. Basically, we tried to keep the survey fairly straightforward and to ensure we got a lot of information back. We're really looking for general trends of what organizations, so whether it's a municipality, a YMCA, a university, what are they doing on those on and around these holidays. So the blue lines outline open regular hours. Red is open regular hours, but programs are reduced. Orange is open reduced hours, reduced programs. Green is open due to a special event, and purple represents being closed. Really what we're looking for is highlighting what the general trends are. So if we look at Family Day, we'll see very few rec centers are closed, outlined by the purple, and most facilities are open some combination of hours. If we look at Good Friday, the majority of facilities are closed. This is one the Elora Community Center traditionally is open for. We have a group in town rents it for a full day rental, and so we'll have something where the Elora Community Center is open and the Center Wellington Sportsplex is typically closed. Easter Monday, we're seeing a trend where, again, most facilities are closed. You'll see on the blue there are some facilities that are open, and there's a few, well, as outlined, opened a minimal hour, or there's some combination of facilities that are open, but the general trend is being closed on Easter Monday. Victoria Day, again, the majority of facilities are closed. Canada Day, you see a little bit of fluctuation in there. This is again a day that the Center Wellington Sportsplex is open. We have the Canada Day celebrations on the grounds on Canada Day, and we have staff in the building, and we open the Aquatic Center, and we have programs running that day. The Elora Community Center is closed though, just because there aren't events going on there. Civic Holiday, again, you'll see the majority of facilities are closed in August. Labor Day, similar trend with with being closed. Thanksgiving Sunday, you'll see a majority of facilities are open. Thanksgiving Sunday is not a statutory holiday. And then we're looking at Thanksgiving Monday. Again, a majority of facilities are closed, although there are some combination of, facilities have some combination of being open. Remembrance Day, the general trend is being open for regular hours, just as we are in town here. Christmas Eve, we'll look at a majority of the programs, or majority of facilities are offering reduced programs and open for reduced hours. This is something to illustrate where it is really hard to always compare apples to apples. If we looked at our own township facilities, we've got the senior center, which would typically close at 4:30 on Christmas Eve. They would show up as actually offering regular programs and being open regular hours that day. We could look at the Sportsplex, closing early. If it closing at 4:30, it would be under that yellow block of having reduced programs and open for reduced hours. Christmas Day, again, the majority of facilities are closed on Christmas Day. When we pull up and look at Boxing Day, we'll see again a majority of the program and majority of facilities are closed that day. New Year's Eve, there's a variety of, a variety of options there, but most facilities are open for some combination of hours that day. And again, the general trend on New Year's Day is being closed for the day. So these were discussed, but not included in CSAC's recommendation to council. So looking at general increase in rates and fees on statutory public holidays. So I guess something to consider: on a typical Monday, our ice is being charged out at a non-prime rate, so at a reduced rate. If we're open on holiday Mondays, staff are being paid a premium, so should we be charging our prime rate for ice, or should we be charging 1.5 times the prime rate? Like, should a new prime rate be, or a new rate be created? We certainly risk, there's a higher hourly rate, so there's more revenue coming in, but we would certainly run the risk of having fewer rentals over the course of the day. If this is something council would like to consider, we could bring something back with the 2020 rates and fees, or another consideration as part of the master plan, we are looking to provide a new pricing policy, and it could be considered at that time. The other question, I guess, is looking at Monday versus Sunday opening for Easter and or Thanksgiving in 2020. Again, would there be more usage with kids still being out of school on Mondays? Currently, the Mondays are the statutory holidays, so we're paying a premium for staffing. Would we get more usage on Easter Monday and Thanksgiving Monday compared to the Sundays that we're currently open for? And this was at the June 12th, 2019 Community Services Advisory Committee meeting. A report was presented by staff, and CSAC made the following recommendation to council. So I don't know if you want me to read the recommendation, or would you like me to read it? So, that the Community Services Advisory Committee, CSAC, received the report on the recreation facility holiday closure schedule for information purposes, and that CSAC recommends to the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington that the closure schedule be adopted as presented at the March 18th, 2019 Committee of the Whole meeting, and that if revisions to the Community Services Facility Closure Schedule are recommended by staff or directed by Council, they are to be considered during budget deliberations, as any change impacts the facility operation budget. And further, that if a significant event or organizer wishes to rent a facility on time scheduled closed, it would be permitted at the discretion of the Managing Director of Community Services or Designate.
Great, thank you very much, Bruce, and thanks to staff for going ahead and providing this report at the recommendation of, at the direction of council. I am curious, when council does provide a direction to do a study like this or a report like this, I'm curious how many people were involved in it and how many hours did staff take to do this report?
Yep, I just have that piece of paper in front of me, and do you have that with you?
I don't actually have it with me.
I just had it in this information. Hang on. Printed it off. I can tell you that I remember off the top of my head. I apologize. I'll find it. It was 6 different staff were involved in putting this report together for 111 and a half hours.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's important. And I'm going to open it up for questions for council. I think we're being way too operational here, to tell you the truth. I think we set policy as a council, and if this comes back and we want to provide some policy direction to staff that we cover cost or come close to cover cost, that we have this on a policy level, I think that's fair game. But I think we got at some point we have to. It's pretty clear from Bruce that they understand the business, they understand the ramifications of it, and I think it's important for council to stay at the policy level. So a lot of work went into this, and hopefully there's some benefit to staff with the work that went into it. From a business intelligence standpoint, hopefully that you get something on it. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Kelly. Not so much questions, but I'd like to speak against this recommendation for a variety of reasons. First of all, I have photographs that I took at the Sportsplex on Easter Sunday. I took them twice, at 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. So on 2 one-hour visits to the Sportsplex, I counted 40 to 45 cars there. So that tells us that people want to use our facilities on stats. Secondly, I attend the gym at the Sportsplex, and the day after and the day before stats, every time I use the facilities before and after stats, people are asking me, why are we closed on stats? Why isn't this gym open on stats? Thirdly, about 3 years ago, I attended a skating party on New Year's Eve in the city of Woodstock. And the city of Woodstock's arena was wide open, and both their pads were packed full of skaters. They had entertainment on New Year's Eve. They had a full slate of activities. And here at home, we were closed tight as a drum. My view is that recreation is a weekend and a holiday business, and we ought to be open. And my view is also that our role is to serve citizens, and citizens want to do recreation on stats. And for all the above reasons, I speak against the recommendation. I think we should be open on stats, at least for a partial day, perhaps 4 or 5 hours. I'm not suggesting we be open from 5 in the morning till 1 in the morning. It was noted in the report that I noted 2 things. One is that a partial day at the Sportsplex costs about $600 in additional costs. 4 hours of ice time rental is $800 of revenue. So we could actually be ahead of the game here if we were able to rent 4 hours of ice on a stat at regular rates. I also noted in that report just one little snapshot. It was Boxing Day at the ECC. 9 hours of ice were available, and 8 of them were rented in 2018. So those are all evidences that people need and want to use our facilities on stats. Thank you.
Just a question, Councillor Foster. Did any of this information that you pulled together find its way to staff while they were making this report?
Some of the information I just pulled from the report. It came from staff.
Okay, but there's other information that you have there, pictures that you have there that could have made it to staff before our committee.
I circulated them at the March meeting, yes.
Okay. Did staff receive any of the items that we're talking about today?
Specifically referencing photos from Easter, that was not submitted to staff. It was? Which staff?
You're right. So
okay.
The photos were taken Easter Sunday. So I made a slight error there. I did circulate them around this table at previous meetings. I even asked people, I brought them again today, and some of us had already seen them.
I guess the challenge that I have is we've directed staff to spend 111 and a half hours of pulling together numbers, and if the result of that is just you don't like the numbers, and based on a picture and a couple other things, you say that you just want to open up on stats. I don't understand why we had staff pulled away from their jobs to do 111 and a half hours of work.
The reason for that, Your Worship, is our citizens need and want to use our facilities. I've just presented various aspects that that prove it to me. And some of the things in the report also prove it. 9 hours of ice available, 8 hours rented.
Sorry, I don't know where you're bringing this from.
It was right in our report, Boxing Day in Elora in 2018. It was in one of Bruce's charts. 9 hours available and 8 of the hours were rented. So some of this information did indeed come from staff.
Right, a small sliver, but again, 111 and a half hours of work went into this. If we wanted to just move ahead until staff to open up on the statutory holidays, we could have done that without any of this information. So I think when we send staff away to do work, we gotta know what we're sending them away to do. If we want to just change the policy, then just move that ahead, and if it doesn't matter what comes out of the report. Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, for Pat or for Bruce, does anybody approach you guys at the community centers expressing that they want to be open? They want you open on the holidays. Have you got any stats from them?
I don't have specific requests for not specific requests.
Councillor Kitchers?
This motion, I'm not against this motion. I just sort of feel that maybe we should just do it for 1 year. There are some numbers here that, like their stats and how much it costs and stuff like that. And I think the thing is, it's very encouraging to see that when we advertise, we get higher numbers. And I think that's quite a significant phenomenon and not out of line. Also, that a survey wasn't actually conducted, it was more historical data. And when people kind of historically don't know that it's open, or they probably don't even think about it. So there's sort of a catch-22. I sort of feel like perhaps we need to make people aware that maybe they could be open, and obviously we don't want to have every stat. I don't believe in every stat holiday being open, but there are specific ones that perhaps they might want more. And I'm just sort of wondering, getting some information, and also budgeting wise, because we're going towards a new budget season, and obviously for this year, I think we should just keep it the way it is, like close them down, whatever. Yeah, exactly. But in terms of to do it ongoing forever, I have some concerns about that, because we don't have actually fresh data, and people aren't aware of it. And so if people are aware, perhaps, and I know that you know, obviously a like is not a do. But maybe if it was just, and I don't think that every stat holiday should be open at all, but perhaps gradual some more, and so maybe that study could be done. That's sort of my feeling about this. I think that for the rest of the year, we should just follow what you said. But then for ongoing, for the future, we should actually maybe look into a partial and just sort of see, and also get a consensus from citizens if they knew about it. Family Day is it's a very encouraging data. I mean, obviously everyone knows it is. It's advertised in many communities, and so they do it. Councillor Foster saying about New Year's Eve, obviously that's something that community wants to have for their families, and they do these certain things, and therefore it is popular. And so I'm just wondering about that. Like, it's one of those things, maybe CSAC could do more of the work, the committee, as opposed to staff, in terms of, it's just finding out more what citizens would like. That's just my suggestion for this. Maybe just limited this motion to just the end of this year and look at that. Pat?
just a couple things. Councillor Foster, you mentioned that in order to open the facility for a partial day at the Sportsplex, it was $623. If we rent ice, it's $1,247 for the shortened day, not the $623, because it does require that we have enough staff to operate the ice as well as the rest of the facility. So that's what Appendix A is trying to demonstrate. There's many levels of service we can operate our facilities. I guess the other thing was we did do a survey. We surveyed our sports user groups, and at the CSAC meeting, and I know Councillor Dunsmore was there and he can attest to the conversation coming back from our public, from our users, from the people who are involved with our sports user groups. The teams want the break on Boxing Day and Christmas Day and New Year's Day. They want time away, and they've said we don't want ice. So I just want to say we did do that survey. The New Year's party, I would have to check in Woodstock. My guess is it's something like a Canada Day we have here. If we weren't doing anything at the Sportsplex for Canada Day, it may be a very slow day there, but in fact it is busy and there's lots of activity going on because the community steps up and organizes an event. So CSAC was very specific in their recommendation that should a group come forward, if the Lions or Optimists came forward and said, we want to put on a New Year's party for this community and we've got some sponsors and we've got people behind us, we would like you to open. At the discretion of the managing director, we can do that. And so if it was a great benefit for economic development, maybe somebody wanted to put on a concert or something on a day that were typically closed, or if it was a community event, then we could take a look at the cost-benefit balance on that and make the just decision to open on a statutory holiday. So I just wanted to, I don't know if Councillor Dunsmore wants to share. Those were some of the comments going around the table. To answer your question, if we were going to open any days, that is why we put the consideration out there for Easter Monday and Thanksgiving Monday. Those are two public holidays where kids are out of school, but not everything is closed. And so those might be the opportunity to test the waters if we were going to do anything in 2020. That's why we proposed it to CSAC. They did not come back with that recommendation to council, but that, of course, is ultimately your decision.
Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. Pat, you mentioned, I just want to be clear, so opening up the Sportsplex for 4 hours, what is the marginal staffing cost? I believe you said $1,000?
I didn't say for 4 hours. I said for the shortened day on Appendix A, which is it's a 10-hour day, right? 9 to 6. A 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. day.
So our cost then for a 9 to 6 day
if we were going to operate
with ice is $1,000.
$1,247.53
Okay.
on a statutory holiday.
May I
Sorry,
ask a
can you
second
repeat
question?
that question because I didn't hear it?
Okay. I believe the question was, what does it take for us to open the center
No.
with ice?
Can I repeat the question?
Okay.
Please repeat the question, then let her answer it.
My question is, how much is the cost, the marginal staffing cost of opening up the Sportsplex with ice from 9 to 6?
$1,247.53.
Second question.
Follow-on question.
We could then rent as much as 18 hours on 2 ice pads. And the revenue from 18 hours, I believe, how much is it per hour? Is it $220? If it is, that's $3,600 of revenue and $1,000 of wages.
Right.
That is
Where the ice
profitable.
rental rates. There's non-prime and prime time, so I have to refer to my staff. It's a complicated question, so I just need to give you an answer. It's not $220 an hour. I'm going to give you the right answer.
How much is it?
Go ahead.
I don't know that I have the numbers right in front of me, but it is the non-prime rate when we're looking at those, hours.
That's the one.
That's 160. So the point remains, whether it's 160, whether it's 220.
Okay, you don't have to
15 to
answer.
20 hours
These
of
are
ice
questions that are just-
puts
Hey,
us into
point of order.
profitable operations.
Point of order. Look, we have a report in front of us. We don't have to fire back questions that they're not prepared to answer. You're also making the assumption that there's the demand for it. This is a perfect example of a discussion that council should not be having. This is an operational discussion. The report is in front of us, and we can do what we want with this report, but we don't have to go back and forth with the detailed information. I mean, if we have a question, we should have put it in our questions when we asked for the report. Councillor Foster.
Your worship, advocating for our citizens is exactly a discussion we ought to be having. My points are quite simple. $1,000 of costs and potential revenue of $2 and a full day of services provided to our citizens. That's very relevant.
Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you, Mayor. First off, I thank you for the report. It was a lot of detail in there. One thing I think that that's interesting is we definitely don't. CSAC obviously went through this, put a lot of work into it, as well as yourselves and staff time to figure this out. I'm willing to accept their report and the recommendation as we go forward with this, because it looks like you've gone through, you know that there's budget implications. If we open it up, you're showing us that you've done your time management, which is good. It shows those kind of things. And we have to also realize that that every time we come back with another budget year, you're going to make these decisions over and over again anyway. So even though they're historical data moving forward, next time you may make that decision again as well, and you may say, hey, we now see we've had 40 requests, right? So this is not a stagnant bylaw. We're moving forward. It'll change as the township changes and as those things happen. So thank you for the report. I would be willing to accept your report, and I think we can take your advice on that.
And just to be clear, we see this every single year. We pass a schedule for the community services facility closure every year. So this is not new that we're seeing this. We see it every year. So every year we can go back to the numbers. And it's part of the budget as well, thanks. Read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receive the report presented to the Community Services Advisory Committee on the recreational facilities holiday closure schedule for information purposes, and that the closure schedule be adopted as presented at the March 18, 2019 Committee of the Whole meeting, and that if revisions to the Community Services Facility closure schedule are recommended by staff or directed by Council, they are to be considered during budget deliberations, as any change impacts the facility operational budget. And further, that if a significant event or organizer wishes to run a facility on time scheduled closed, it would be permitted at the discretion of the Managing Director of Community Services or Designate. Move for that recommendation. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you very much, Pat. I know that was a lot of work. We have Section 8. We have information items. We have the operational results from March 31st. We have the minutes of the Economic Development Task Force, minutes from the Heritage Center in Wellington, minutes from the Community Advisory Committee, and Committee of the Whole tracking list. Anything on those in those 5 items that Council has a question or concern or comment about? Okay, so I'm now, I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington convene in closed session in accordance to Section 239 2B of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended to consider personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Can I move for that recommendation to go into closed? Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And we are in closed. So we'll stay here, and everybody, we'll go downstairs.
We're gonna have to wait till she cuts everything off. If we go downstairs, we could get started right away.
Okay, we'll reconvene at closed downstairs. Yep.